Our story begins with a young woman who found herself completely devoted to a mobile game called Emotion Fantasy. She poured her heart and soul into the digital world, happily spending every bit of her life savings to collect the characters she adored. She developed such a profound connection to her favorites that she felt she would do absolutely anything to help them. Her goal was to ensure that the characters she loved so much had every opportunity to truly shine in their own story. She decides that she will take on the role of the story's villainess and perform the part with absolute perfection. The atmosphere shifts to a grand courtyard where a sudden declaration rings out through the air. A young man points an accusing finger at Eldia, loudly announcing that she is officially stripped of her noble rank and her title. Instead of showing any sign of distress, Eldia remains remarkably calm, merely stating that she is curious about what he could possibly mean. Standing before her with a look of intense frustration is William Feedley, the second prince of the kingdom. Eldia refers to the frustrated young man as her dearest fiancé. Eldia's body betrays the intense excitement she feels as a visible shiver runs through her. Eldia is overcome with emotion, pressing a hand to her mouth as she struggles to process the reality of seeing William standing right there in front of her. She begins to admire every detail of his appearance, noting the way his golden hair catches the light with a striking radiance. To her, his eyes are particularly captivating, possessing a deep blue shade that reminds her of a clear summer sky. Her thoughts continue to race as she considers how impressive it is for someone only in their early 20s to have already more than lived up to all of his princely duties. She is further dazzled by the fact that he is also an incredibly skilled warrior and a dedicated member of the military on top of his royal responsibilities. Eldia realizes that he is so incredibly popular. William raises his voice to declare that, despite her high status as a marquise, she has dared to belittle the royal family. He goes on to accuse her of committing a vast number of evil deeds that he believes are a direct threat to the safety of the entire kingdom. The prince points toward her and proclaims that her greatest sin of all is the horrendous way she has treated the priestess. He states that the young woman is considered to be one of the most precious treasures in the entire kingdom and deserves the utmost respect. Sister Yuria looks toward Prince William with a plea in her eyes, insisting that the current situation must be a giant mistake. She believes that Lady Eldia surely has some hidden justification for everything she has done. Prince William responds to Sister Yuria with a soft smile, acknowledging that his actions might seem harsh to someone as compassionate as she is. He remains firm in his stance that Eldia is the source of all the terrible things that have caused the priestess so much pain and declares that the villainess is no longer worthy of any protection. Eldia is moved to tears by the interaction between her favorite characters. She mentally screams her adoration for Yuria. Eldia considers Yuria to be the embodiment of a delicate beauty, noting her striking light silver hair and emerald green eyes. She views the priestess as a genuine angel who conquered her own fears at the tender age of 16 to embark on a quest to save the world and protect her loved ones. Part of what makes Yuria so popular is the fact that she is completely oblivious to the romantic interest she attracts. This trait makes her an instant favorite, leading to humorous situations where she receives from those around her. Eldia ponders the inevitability of falling for such an adorably sweet girl, reasoning that anyone in William's position would naturally want to protect her. She finds herself in complete agreement with the prince's feelings. Eldia firmly believes that anyone who would dare to bully a girl as sweet as the priestess deserves to die 1,000 deaths. She knows she must continue to play her part because she is convinced that if she does not act exactly as the story requires, the entire world will face total destruction. She takes a deep breath and prepares to start her performance. Eldia begins her act by maintaining a facade of total innocence. She claims that she was merely fulfilling her noble duties and doing whatever she thought was in the best interest of the common people. Looking directly at the prince, she reminds him that she worked herself to the bone during her time as a candidate for the priesthood. She asserts that her conduct was always befitting of someone betrothed to royalty and says she is surprised that he would suggest all of her hard work was done in vain. William is not moved by her performance and immediately calls out what he believes to be a blatant lie. He states with total confidence that he is well aware of everything she has been doing behind the scenes. In front of the gathered crowd, the prince declares that Eldia has deceived innocent people and led them toward a path of ruin and corruption. He reveals the final blow to her social standing, explaining that he has already informed the king of her actions and that their betrothal has been officially dissolved. William throws out the ultimate insult by calling Eldia a vile princess, which is actually a title she wears with secret pride. Internally, she is overjoyed that he did his homework regarding her supposed evil deeds, and she celebrates with a triumphant mental victory pose. She hides her smirk behind a lace fan and coolly explains that she only wanted to use everyone for a bit of light entertainment, acting as if she cannot understand why anyone would find fault with her desire for a little fun. A small blush colors her face, as she recalls how much this exact scene broke her heart when she was just a player on the other side of the screen. She feels a surge of happiness, knowing that she is finally living out the dramatic moment she once admired from afar. Both the young man and Yuria look on with heavy hearts, trying to understand the reason for the sudden and cruel change in the woman they thought they knew. Eldia turns her gaze toward the distressed young man and addresses him as her dear hero, licked, thinking, why is he surprised? Looking at the expression of total despair on the face of the young hero, Eldia experiences a strange mix of emotions as her heart both aches for him and beats with excitement. Eldia feels guilty as she looks away, internally apologizing to the hero for her sudden shift in behavior. She reflects on how she was always so kind to him in the past and truly considers him one of her absolute favorites, but she knows that to keep the narrative moving forward, she simply cannot stop here. She peers over the edge of her fan and addresses the young man as her dear hero. She continues her performance by mentioning that she heard about the grave injuries he sustained while investigating ghosts in the western ruins. With a mockingly sweet tone, she expresses her feigned relief at his recovery, noting that such rapid healing is exactly what one would expect from a true hero. Sir Anson steps forward with a look of pure rage, shouting that those creatures were far more dangerous than simple ghosts and were actually powerful liches. He accuses Eldia of being the one who purposefully withheld that vital information and sent the hero into a death trap regardless. Anson gets more angry at her and shouts he is tired of her nonsense. The sight of Sir Anson's righteous fury leaves Eldia completely starstruck. She can't help but celebrate the fact that another one of her favorite characters has finally entered the scene. Eldia's mind is filled with admiration for Sir Anson, whom she views as a straightforward and hot-blooded man whose very nature is as bright and intense as the sun. She recalls how his exceptional defensive and piercing abilities were the key elements that carried her through the most difficult levels of the game. Sir Anson is visibly consumed by rage as he demands to know if the princess has any real understanding of the immense suffering her selfish actions have caused for so many people. Eldia responds casually that she was merely pointing out that she was simply providing people with the specific information they were already seeking out. Eldia insists that the choices people made afterward were entirely their own responsibility and that she cannot possibly be blamed for the consequences of their actions. Below her, Sir Anson fixes her with a piercing glare, his anger only growing at her. Sir Anson finally reaches his breaking point and draws his weapon with a sharp sound as he prepares to strike. Licht watches in alarm and calls out Sir Anson's name, sensing the immediate danger. Eldia remains surprisingly calm as the attack comes toward her, reassuring herself that everything is going to be just fine. She recalls the mechanics of the game, remembering that the Villainess character is supposed to block such an incoming strike simply by closing her fan at the perfect moment. Suddenly, someone leaps forward with incredible speed. A man throws himself directly into the path of the blade, shouting out Eldia's name as he creates a human shield to keep her from harm. Eldia watches in stunned silence. The world seems to slow down as the first few drops of dark blood begin to fall. The high-stakes drama causes a wave of panic to ripple through the gathered onlookers. The sharp edge of the blade finds its mark, piercing through the side of the man who dared to stand in its way. Sir Anson looks on with a face twisted in disbelief, unable to comprehend why anyone would ever choose to risk their own life to protect a woman with such a wicked reputation. Blood began to seep through the man named Albert's fine clothes. Sir Anson shouts and demands to know if the man had any idea of the many terrible things the princess had supposedly done. Despite the pain radiating from his wound, Albert simply states that he owed far too much to Lady Eldia. Sir Anson stood frozen in a stunned silence. Behind his protection, Eldia watches with a heavy heart, quietly wondering to herself why Albert would choose to go to such extremes just to ensure her safety. Recognizing that she had to maintain her persona, Eldia tightly gripped the silk of her skirt and looked at Sir Anson with disappointment. She chided him for his barbaric behavior in injuring her servant, openly wondering if the high standards once held by the knights of the kingdom had really fallen so low as to allow for such mindless violence. The sting of her words hit Sir Anson harder than any physical blow, causing his hand to tremble as he gripped the hilt of his sword with renewed intensity. She offered a silent and sincere internal apology to Sir Anson. Eldia gathers her long skirts and turns her back. She addresses Prince William with a calm tone. With a confident smile, Eldia considers whether the prince truly believes that simply taking away her title will be enough to stop her. She encourages him to imagine for a moment that she actually did commit every single horrible act he accused her of earlier. Eldia reflects on the fact that her character's supposed evil deeds have been whispered about throughout the entire land of Feedley. She continues her internal reasoning, noting that beyond this single event, there is no real proof of her guilt other than the simple fact that she happened to be present at the scenes. While she admits that a noble indulging in certain vices might be considered scandalous, she knows that mere rumors are not enough to convict her of anything more serious. She is certain that her loyal servant would never have overlooked such a crucial detail. Tucking her decorative fan beneath her chin, Eldia feels a quiet sense of triumph. She is absolutely sure that the heroes will not be able to find any concrete evidence against her at this specific moment. Turning back to Prince William, Eldia informs him that her priority is now to tend to her servant's physical wounds. She calmly explains that she will be taking her leave immediately. Prince William points an accusing finger, declaring that she is to be confined to her estate until further notice. He shouts after her that she will be informed of the specific punishments for her various other crimes at a later time, punctuating his command by calling her a vile princess once more. As Eldia begins to walk away with a satisfied smirk on her face, Prince William calls out that she should not think for a second that she will get away with this behavior. Eldia performs a graceful and dramatic bow, reflecting on how she was once just an ordinary and somewhat unpopular woman in her late 20s. She feels a deep sense of wonder at finding herself living inside the vibrant world of the mobile game she loved more than anything else. Now, she fully embraces her new identity as the early game antagonist and proudly identifies herself as the vile princess. The protagonist's previous life came to a sudden and embarrassing end when she was unexpectedly crushed by the massive mountain of game merchandise she had spent her life collecting. After the initial shock of her demise wore off, she was startled to find that she had been transported into a new body and was now inhabiting the form of a 7-year-old girl named Eldia Euclair, who happened to be the most notorious and wicked princess in existence. Eldia immediately recognized her surroundings as a perfect replica of the setting from her favorite mobile role-playing game, making her realize that she had been reborn into a digital fantasy world. She understood that she was now a part of the story called Emotion Fantasy, a tale centered on a brave hero named Licht who obtains a sacred sword so he can fulfill his ultimate duty of protecting a gentle woman known as Sister Yuria. In this world, the legendary heroes spend their time investigating bizarre events, such as the arrival of violent monsters emerging from a gate to the underworld, eventually setting off on a grand quest to find and defeat the powerful demon who is causing all the trouble in the kingdom. Because the protagonist had fallen completely in love with the game's colorful cast, she ended up pouring a small fortune into her hobby as she became more involved in the fandom. This dedicated obsession was the exact reason she knew just how vital the role of the vile princess truly was within the game's complex world. The princess was a central figure whose actions carried immense weight throughout the original plot. In the original timeline, Eldia had spent time building a relationship with Yuria, a fellow candidate for the role of priestess. Yuria was famous among fans for possessing an exceptionally rare talent for purification magic. Eldia also extended her guidance to the young hero Licht, a simple boy from the country. She patiently sat with him to explain the intricacies of high society etiquette, ensuring he understood the proper way to conduct himself. Eldia treated both of her young companions with such genuine care and constant encouragement that she seemed almost like a protective motherly figure. The original Eldia was truly a piece of work, rounding up unsuspecting people to serve as test subjects for her twisted magical experiments and forcing commoners to fight to the death just for her own amusement. Behind the scenes, she went so far as to absorb every poison known to man. Also, she could bloom into a lethal and terrifying figure known as the Deadly Blossom. However, there was a method to all that madness because the constant trouble Eldia caused served as the ultimate bonding experience for the protagonists. The girl realized that without a truly vile princess to unite them, her favorite characters would inevitably fail and lose their final battle against the powerful Demon King. She felt incredibly fortunate that she had dedicated so much of her past life to this game, having played through every single character route so many times that the entire timeline of events was permanently burned into her brain. Because her love for this world and its characters was so profound, she made the bold decision to fully commit to her role as the antagonist. She was determined to embody the Wicked Princess with total dedication. Through her own backbreaking efforts, everything seemed to be progressing exactly according to the script, eventually leading to the moment where she was stripped of her noble title just as she had planned. Everything was going perfectly until she noticed one tiny, almost unnoticeable thing that had deviated from the original story in a very unexpected way. Safe within the privacy of her carriage, the princess finally lets out all of her bottled-up excitement, screaming into her hands about how incredibly precious everyone really is. She can hardly contain her joy as she gushes over how adorable and brave Yuria was, especially since the girl still wanted to see the good in her despite her villainous reputation. She thinks Licht is the ultimate protagonist, finding that hearing his heroic lines in person was even more impressive than reading them in the game. Even the intense glares from William and Anson left her feeling overwhelmed with emotion, as she knew their hostility only came from a place of deep devotion to their friends. Just as quickly as she started her outburst, she pulls herself back together and exhales a long breath to regain her composure as she is addressed as Lady Elua. Her resolve is immediately tested when she looks at Albert, whose calm and refined presence seems to radiate through the room. He stands there with a stoic expression. She finds herself completely unable to think straight, her mind filled with nothing but the realization that Albert is far more attractive. Albert decided to start undressing right on the couch in front of her. She turns away in a total panic, frantically wondering why he is stripping so suddenly and begging him to hide his impressive physique because seeing it up close and personal is far too much for her to bear. She hides her face and tries to catch her breath. Albert remains shirtless, calmly asking if his mistress is so heartless that she would deny him the chance to care for the injuries he received while keeping her safe. Meanwhile, the princess is desperately shielding her eyes while she suggests a simple solution, pointing out that he could easily resolve the issue by consuming some of his blood instead. He continues his casual explanation, reminding her that such a method is perfectly normal given his nature as a damper. Turning his back to reach for something, Albert notes that the princess really hasn't changed at all since she would rather endure the discomfort of her servant drinking her blood than have to look directly at his bare torso. It is a well-known fact in this world that as the child of a human and a vampire, consuming blood allows him to recover from his wounds much faster than any normal medicine could. The princess eventually manages a tiny peek from behind her pillow, admitting that she simply cannot bring herself to look at him directly and asking him to be patient with her. She clarifies that this intense reaction is unique to him and begs him to go easy on her. As he reaches for a medical kit, Albert calmly acknowledges her confession, stating that he understands exactly what is happening. He concludes that her strange behavior stems entirely from the fact that the version of him from her favorite game remains her most beloved character. Still hiding her flustered face behind the oversized cushion, Eldia shouts out the name Albert Bennett with a mixture of frustration and utter desperation. She demands to know why a character of his caliber would ever end up as her personal servant. Albert looks back at her with a calm, steady gaze, reminding her that he is by her side simply because she was the one who took him in. Internally, the princess agrees that she certainly knows the facts, but that is exactly where the mystery lies for her. Out of everything that has happened since her reincarnation, the specific circumstances that led to him joining her household is the one detail she simply cannot figure out. Despite her confusion, she can't help but gush over the fact that Albert Bennett is her absolute favorite character, the one she considers her best boy above all others. She remembers clearly that in the original timeline of the main story, he is a mature 26-year-old man. She finds herself completely captivated by his striking appearance, noting that his deep purple eyes seem to shine more brilliantly than any precious jewel while always carrying a faint, sorrowful expression. His features are so delicate and refined that she believes anyone would easily believe him to be a sensitive artist rather than a warrior. The protagonist remembers that Albert's deadly efficiency in battle and his deeply tragic history were exactly what made him such a hit with the fans. He is a master of the shadows, a damper assassin who spends his life taking on the most perilous and difficult missions imaginable, all while looking incredibly handsome in the process. His journey into darkness started early when he was abducted as a defenseless young boy. Instead of a normal childhood, he was put through a series of agonizing experiments and forced into a grueling training program intended to turn him into the ultimate weapon of assassination. Despite the cruelty he faced, Albert's will never wavered, and he found strength in the company of his fellow child captives. Together, they formed a small, desperate family, sharing quiet moments where they would dream of a future where they were finally free from their captors' control. But because this is a classic tragic backstory, things took a heartbreaking turn when Albert returned from an assignment only to find that his friends had not been as lucky as him. He was left standing alone in the aftermath of a massacre, having lost every person he ever cared about while he was away serving his masters. She took over the body of Princess Eldia at the tender age of 7. Long before the main events of the game were set to begin, Eldia realized that all of her favorite characters were still just children, including her beloved Albert. Since the location where he was being held captive happened to be quite close to her royal estate, she felt a sudden rush of adrenaline from her recent rebirth and decided to wander into the dark back streets to find him. Her search eventually led her to a grim scene where she stumbled upon a young Albert right as he was finishing the job of eliminating the people who had been controlling him. Seeing him up close, Eldia was struck by how incredibly young he looked compared to the mature man she had known in the digital world. This heartbreaking sight was the moment everything truly clicked for her, forcing her to accept that this world was now her actual reality. She felt a deep sense of compassion and decided that she simply could not leave him there to endure the years of misery and suffering that the game's original plot had in store for him. However, looking back on the moment now, she admits that she didn't actually spend much time contemplating the moral weight or the grand consequences of her actions until much later. The young princess walked with a sense of purpose, firmly gripping the hand of the wounded boy as she led him toward the safety of her royal estate. Once they arrived, Eldia wasted no time in settling him into a comfortable room within the palace. With a burst of childish energy, she pushed him toward the bed and made it very clear that he was welcome to stay and work for her for as long as it took for his injuries to fully heal. At 16 years old, Albert was already beginning to show the striking features that would one day make him a legend. He possessed the lean, graceful build of a boy who was still growing, yet his natural beauty was so undeniable that it would have been obvious to anyone who looked at him. The princess could not help but chuckle at her own audacity. She realized that her plan likely only worked because her appearance as a small 7-year-old made her seem far more innocent and less threatening than she actually was, allowing her to get away with things a grown woman never could. Her decision to help him had been born from a sudden and uncharacteristic impulse. Knowing that he was someone who generally valued his independence and possessed all the necessary skills to survive on his own, she was fully prepared for the reality that he would likely choose to leave the estate the very moment he felt strong enough to move on. Albert proved to be far more adaptable than she had ever anticipated. While the princess was not paying attention, he began teaching himself the intricate skills required for domestic service. Albert chose to stay behind and began his new life working as a dedicated butler within the grand walls of the Euclid estate. The situation became even more complicated when Albert managed to piece together some of the princess's deepest secrets. While he did not realize she had been reincarnated, he correctly deduced that she was mentally an adult and possessed an uncanny knowledge of future events. He even began to wonder if the term fave referred to some powerful or significant figure from a time yet to come. The pressure of having her secrets discovered caused the princess to descend into a state of total panic. She felt as though she might actually die from the stress, frantically worrying about what he could possibly want from her. In her desperation, she felt ready to spill every detail of her plan before he even had a chance to force the information out of her. Albert began assisting her with a complex and brilliant evil scheme she had designed specifically for the benefit of her favorite characters, treating her unusual requests as if they were the most natural course of action for him to take. She struggled to understand the logic behind everything that was happening. Regardless of the mystery behind his loyalty, she had to admit that having someone with the elite skills of an assassin at her disposal was an absolute gift. Out of everyone serving at the royal estate, he was the only one who truly made her feel at ease, providing a level of comfort and security that no other servant could match. This shift in the timeline meant that instead of rising to the top of the underworld as a legendary killer, Albert had spent the last 10 years evolving into a flawless, first-class butler who never left her side. As they traveled together in the privacy of their carriage, Eldia could not help but comment on the massive mess her life had become. Albert remained perfectly composed, calmly reminding her that there was no need for concern because he had already taken the initiative to plan out her entire escape route himself. Eldia gripped her pillow, mentally cursing her ridiculously talented super butler for being able to solve any problem she threw at him. Even as she grumbled about his over-the-top competence, she could not hide the fact that she absolutely loved it when he looked down on her with such cool confidence. Albert sits across from her in the quiet of the carriage and wonders if she is truly content with how everything is played out. Eldia remains silent for a moment, her eyes wide. He continues by pointing out that she has dedicated herself to helping a group of people he views as nothing more than ungrateful louts. It seems unfair to him that she is choosing to vanish into the shadows without any of them ever understanding the depth of the sacrifices she made for their sake. This observation causes the princess to snap, and she loudly insists that she is perfectly fine with the situation. She explains with intense conviction that seeing her favorite characters happy is the single greatest reward she could ever hope to receive. Albert remains unimpressed, reminding her that she did far more than just play a role, as she invested in countless businesses to boost the economy and worked herself to the bone to raise the standard of living across the entire kingdom. Eldia defensively admits that her frantic efforts were actually a result of pure panic because she was terrified to find that the advanced magic and technology from the game didn't even exist in this reality yet. She eventually settles back against the cushions and sighs, concluding that the transformation of the kingdom was simply the way things turned out in the end. She finds comfort in the fact that her hard work paid off in a very practical way, as she managed to amass so much wealth that she will never have to worry about her financial security, regardless of where her journey takes her next. The princess practically shouted her intentions, declaring her primary motivation for everything was the desperate need to make money so she could properly support her favorite characters. Albert watched her outburst, with his usual unreadable expression. Eldia noticed his stoic gaze and snapped at him, demanding to know why he was looking at her that way when he was the one who had asked the question in the first place. As she clutched her pillow, she could not help but feel that her butler was occasionally a bit rude to her, even though he immediately pivoted the conversation toward discussing their very next move. Albert looked at her with a steady and focused gaze, asking her to rely on the special knowledge she possessed to explain exactly what was supposed to happen in the timeline from this point forward. With a calm and reflective expression, Eldia noted that the formal removal of her family title was finally official, marking the end of her life as a high-ranking noble. The story dictated that the notorious princess was meant to vanish without leaving a single trace behind, successfully avoiding capture before the authorities could ever apprehend her. The kingdom is set to launch a massive search for the missing royal, yet they will never manage to track her down. Eldia explains that the coming days provide the ideal window for her to slip away from the public eye entirely. She reflects on how rumors will eventually claim she either perished or joined forces with the demons, noting that her character is never actually seen again in the main story according to her knowledge of the original timeline. Throughout her journey, her primary focus has been to ensure that the narrative remains unchanged and moves forward exactly as it was always meant to. To guarantee that she can escape this role with her life intact, the villainess understands that she must take decisive action right now to secure her own safety. Having successfully navigated the high-stakes confrontation scene, the princess feels a wave of relief as she realizes she can finally move on from her reputation as the vile princess. She reflects on how incredibly hard she has worked to reach this point, knowing that she is only a few small steps away from achieving her ultimate freedom. Albert quietly acknowledges her plan, stating that he will finalize all the necessary preparations as soon as they arrive at the estate. Eldia finds herself momentarily speechless as she looks at him. Eldia looks at Albert with a mixture of concern and hesitation, noting that it sounds as though he is fully planning on accompanying her into exile. She genuinely wonders if he is truly comfortable with such a decision. Without warning, Albert moves from his seat and leans in dangerously close. He peers directly into her eyes with a knowing and slightly mischievous expression, teasingly asking if she has finally grown tired of looking at his face. The princess immediately loses her composure and shouts that she hasn't grown tired of him at all, pointing out that he must surely know exactly how attractive he really is. She admits with total desperation that the way he uses his striking looks even more effectively than his digital counterpart only makes him that much more appealing to her. Eldia quickly covers her mouth in a fit of embarrassment, realizing she got carried away and accidentally confessed her deepest feelings. Albert simply smiles and settles back into his seat, telling his mistress that since she clearly doesn't mind his presence, she should simply relax and spend her time adoring her favorite boy. Eldia pouts at Albert's constant teasing, grumbling to herself about how mean her servant can be at times. She tries to assert a bit of authority by reminding him that she is still technically his boss, but her attempt to sound intimidating is met with his usual calm stare. Albert acknowledges her reminder with a quiet sense of amusement. He notes that he is perfectly aware of their professional relationship while announcing that they have officially arrived at their destination. Stepping out into the cool air, Albert gracefully extends a gloved hand toward her, offering a polite invitation for her to disembark. Eldia remains frozen inside the carriage for a moment, asking him to wait. The princess finds herself completely overwhelmed by his charm, covering her mouth in a desperate attempt to hide her blushing face. She thinks to herself about how incredibly cool he is while begging for just a single minute to compose herself. Albert mutters a soft observation to himself, noting that she truly does seem to love the version of him from her favorite game with all her heart. Eldia sits in the background with a look of utter confusion. Eldia was finally tucked safely into her bed, reflecting on the fact that the day had been a major showdown. She realized that while she had tried her best to mentally prepare for the intensity of the confrontation, her mind drifted back to the moment Albert leaned in, his gloved hand gently lifting her chin as he looked her in the eye. He had explained that was merely part of his official duty as her servant. Snuggling deeper into her blankets, the princess felt as though she were in a state of pure bliss. She acknowledged that her butler was fully aware of his own attractiveness and definitely used his striking looks to his advantage whenever the situation called for it. Just as Eldia was beginning to drift off, a sharp clacking sound against the window suddenly caught her attention. She realized with a start that she might have an intruder, which was confusing since her room was heavily protected by aura suppressors and powerful magic designed to block all forms of scrying. She found herself wondering what kind of incredibly talented mage could possibly bypass her security to find her here. Curious and a bit wary, the girl rolled over and took a tiny peek from under the safety of her covers. Her eyes suddenly went wide with total shock. Outside the window, A nervous Sister Yuria urges her companion to hurry before someone catches them in the act of trespassing. She is clearly on edge as she prepares to make her move, her hands clasped together in a desperate plea for haste. The silence of the night is suddenly shattered as the glass panels break apart, allowing the intruders to stumble directly into the bedroom. Eldia watches from the safety of her blankets, wondering to herself if she has finally descended into a strange and vivid dream. The princess practically jumps out of her skin, sitting bolt upright with her hair in a mess as she tries to process the sudden invasion. Sister Yuria apologizes frantically for the rude awakening while insisting that she is only there because of a matter of extreme urgency. Eldia can hardly believe her eyes as she recognizes the girl as her top favorite character from the game, who has somehow appeared right in front of her. Licht joins the conversation with a stern expression, addressing the princess by her name and commanding her to leave the estate with them at this very instant. Eldia is further stunned to find her second favorite character, the legendary chosen hero himself, standing in her room. A heavy and awkward silence falls over the room as the three of them simply stare at one another. Eldia is left in a state of total bewilderment, her mind racing to understand why the very heroes she spent years antagonizing are now trying to rescue her. Licht and Yuria stand before Eldia, their expressions filled with an intensity she never expected. Licht firmly declares that she must leave with them right away. Tucked under her blankets, Eldia tries to make sense of the absurdity unfolding in her bedroom, wondering to herself what they could possibly be doing there at such an hour. She finds herself fixated on the way Yuria used such a formal title, unable to remember a single moment when the girl ever called her my lady in the past. None of this was ever supposed to happen according to the original story. Sister Yuria leans in with a look of pure adoration, her hands clasped together as if in prayer while she confesses that she has longed to address Eldia as my lady for a very long time. Yuria continues her heartfelt explanation, noting that the church raised her with nothing but vague expectations and a cold sense of duty to fulfill. She credits Eldia for giving her the encouragement and the reason she needed to keep going, insisting that she only managed to achieve her position as a priestess because of the support she received from the princess. Because of this deep bond, Yuria is determined to be there for her friend in her greatest time of need, leaving Eldia looking completely blank and speechless. Licht remembers how everyone else in his life chose to tiptoe around him. He points out that Eldia was the only person who actually took the time to teach him the essential things he needed to know to conduct himself properly. With a loud and confident declaration, he explains that it is entirely thanks to her guidance that he finally managed to step into his destined role as the legendary hero. Licht looks at the princess with determination, explaining that it is simply impossible for a hero tasked with saving the world to ignore a person to whom he owes such a massive debt. Eldia can only manage a strained, nervous smile as she listens to him. In her mind, Eldia is a whirlwind of confusion, wondering how they could possibly be acting this way when she knows for a fact they saw the undeniable proof of her evil deeds. She figures they must have suspected her role as the culprit deep down, and seeing the evidence should have confirmed those fears. She begins to consider the hilarious possibility that the shock of her betrayal was so intense that they have both spiraled into a state of total denial. Eldia puts on her most sinister expression and mocks the idea of them saving her, pointing out that she never once requested their assistance. She asks if they have already forgotten the serious charges Prince William brought against her earlier that day. Internally, she is desperately trying to convince them that the kind and gentle princess they thought they knew was nothing more than a calculated lie designed to deceive them. Eldia feels incredibly proud of her ability to keep it together while her absolute favorite characters are standing right in the middle of her bedroom, even though her inner fangirl is screaming with excitement. Licht remains unfazed by her act, calmly acknowledging that she was indeed involved in every single dangerous incident they encountered, including the terrifying moment the gate to the underworld opened. He looks her directly in the eye with a gaze full of trust and sorrow, stating his firm belief that she must have had a very important reason for everything she did. Licht continues, pointing out that the corrupt nobles who were exploiting and trafficking people had become a major problem for the kingdom of Feedly. He shouts with a sense of urgent realization that no one in the entire land would have ever known about those crimes if Eldia hadn't personally gotten involved. Yuria joins in by recalling the terrifying moment at the gate to the underworld, noting that Eldia only seemed to appear exactly when Yuria was busy helping people with her purification magic. She reflects on how that confrontation was an incredibly hard-won battle, but she remains certain that the brutal training the princess forced her to endure was the only reason she was able to succeed. Yuria insists that Eldia was always finding ways to aid them throughout their journey. The sheer radiance of their gratitude is almost too much for Eldia to handle, and she finds herself shielding her eyes from what she considers a truly dazzling display. In the quiet of her own thoughts, Eldia reflects on the very moment she decided to take the road of Villainess and the oath she swore to herself back then. She had firmly resolved that she would never do anything that other people would feel they had to take care of on their own. Eldia reflects on the fundamental nature of her reality, recognizing that the hero and the priestess represent the true core of this world, while she is destined to be their ultimate enemy. She views her involvement in their lives as a small way to offer redemption for the suffering she has caused through her various deeds. She firmly believes that if she, as the notorious villainess, takes part in a conflict, these heroes will never fail to intervene and save the day. The princess tries to maintain her act, worrying that while her choices were correct, a direct denial might accidentally reveal far more about her intentions than she would like. She quietly mumbles to herself about her presence at the gate to the underworld, admitting that she really just wanted to see her favorite characters in action and be there to lend a hand if they ever needed it. Eldia finds herself in a state of total panic, screaming to herself that she simply cannot think of a single good excuse to salvage her reputation as a villain. Her frustration only grows when Yuria mentions that there is one more thing to address. Yuria presents a book featuring two people on the cover, enthusiastically announcing that she is a massive fan of the publication Eldia secretly put out. Eldia is absolutely mortified as she lets out a silent scream of pure terror. She recognizes the book immediately as the indie comic she personally created and published, desperately justifying her actions to herself as a noble attempt to provide a much-needed monetary boost to the local publishing industry. She reflects on the fact that she simply had to do it because being transported into the world of her favorite characters felt like being surrounded by a bountiful treasure. She felt a desperate need to express her passion, realizing that despite being in her dream world, she didn't have a single person with whom she could actually share her deep and fanatical loves. To solve her problem, she took her creative interests underground, utilizing her significant power as a high-ranking noblewoman along with her various criminal connections to make her vision a reality. She spent her secret hours channeling the intense flames of her devotion onto the pages of her books. Eldia admits to herself that she simply could not handle the constant pressure of acting like the vile princess every hour of every day. She felt a longing for a private space where she could finally cast aside her villainous mask and be her true self. Yuria hugs the book tightly against her chest, her face glowing with a blissful smile as she concludes that there must be a very good reason for a person who can write such beautiful tales of pure and honest love to also perform such horrible deeds. She finds herself deeply moved by the stories, confessing that the princess's writing makes her heart flutter with an excitement. Eldia covers her face in a desperate attempt to hide her embarrassment, frantically insisting that it is simply wrong to make assumptions about a creator's personality based entirely on the works they produce. Yuria, holding the book up as she points out how the author was always remarkably polite and sincere when replying to messages from readers. She looks at the princess with pleading eyes, begging for an explanation. The princess lets out a panicked cry of distress, demands to know what could possibly make Yuria think she was the one who wrote that story in the first place. Yuria kneels before the bed, calmly revealing that her own fan name is Aruran. She looks directly at the princess and asks if she is truly the creator known as Yukiuku. Eldia is left in a state of absolute sweating terror as she can hardly process the shocking discovery that the legendary saintess is actually one of her regular readers. Yuria continues her analysis, pointing out that the author's speech patterns are remarkably similar to the princess's own way of talking. She adds that the men featured in the stories bear a striking resemblance to Prince William and Sir Anson, a detail that first made her begin to wonder about the creator's true identity. Eldia is sent into a complete internal panic, screaming to herself about how she never once considered that her writing style or character choices would be so easy to recognize. The self-publishing culture that Eldia originally introduced began to spread through the capital city like wildfire, eventually growing to the point where even total beginners could submit their own stories to various scenes. To further support the growing community, a special service was established allowing fans to anonymously send mail to authors through the publisher. Irurin and Yukuyuku were both regular contributors and often sent letters to each other. Licht suddenly joins the conversation, his face turning red as he fidgets, and admits that the stories about two girls falling in love were actually quite exciting to read. He confesses with a shy expression that the princess's work opened the door to an entirely new world for him. Yuria turns to Licht with a bit of academic frustration, reminding him that the specific genre of stories he enjoyed is officially known as girls' love, or GL for short. Licht offers a simple, dazed acknowledgement. With a sudden burst of enthusiasm, Licht looks directly at the princess and declares a sincere appreciation for the girls' love stories she wrote. Eldia enters a state of total mental collapse as she recalls the specific, juicy details of her own work, noting that her stories involve complex power dynamics between older and younger women that eventually take a very intense and revealing turn. She is haunted by the terrifying realization that Yuria must have shared these mature tales with Licht. Licht and Yuria reach out to firmly grip Eldia's hands. Licht warns her with a heavy expression that she won't be given any opportunity to explain her side of the story before the authorities try to take her life, but he promises that they will protect her at all costs if she will only agree to flee the estate with them right now. Yuria leans in with a sharp gaze, stating that the princess is hiding some critical piece of information about the situation. Eldia is left making a faint, incoherent sound of bewilderment. Licht narrows his eyes, his voice dropping to a serious tone as he admits that he can sense something is fundamentally wrong with the current state of the kingdom. Licht and Yuria look at the princess with unwavering trust. Yuria explains that they want her to join them on their journey so they can work together to uncover the truth about what is happening to the kingdom and the world at large. Eldia is screaming internally about how that specific line is a legendary hero trope that has won over countless characters in the original game. She feels absolutely thrilled and completely confused, wondering why they are using such an iconic, heart-melting invitation on her when she is supposed to be the vile villainess. The princess begins to sweat as she desperately wonders how she managed to mess up the original story so badly. She realizes with a sense of growing dread that her favorite heroes are already starting to notice the abnormalities she tried to hide, and she finds herself pleading for someone to come and save her from the mounting chaos. Albert charges into the room with a look of frantic concern, shouting out the name Lady Elua. The quiet scene of the room is palpable as the hero and the priestess maintain their firm hold on Eldia's hands. Albert lets out a thunderous roar of pure protective fury, demanding to know exactly what the intruders think they are doing to his lady. His eyes burn with a terrifying intensity that matches the sharp, metallic sound of his blade being drawn from its sheath. Albert lunges forward with incredible speed, his weapon clashing against Licht's sacred sword. Albert takes a sharp blade and deliberately cuts into his own palm with a sudden snap. Licht finds himself completely stunned by the realization that his opponent has the terrifying ability to turn his own life force into a literal chain. Albert swings the weapon with a powerful rush of air, forcing Licht to pull back and raise his sacred sword in a defensive stance. Eldia realizes that her butler is genuinely attempting to kill her favorite characters because he views their sudden presence in her room as a direct threat to her safety. Sister Yuria is visibly shaken by the discovery that the person standing before them is actually a vampire, a realization that makes her even more desperate to act. She prepares her purification magic to counter the servant's power. Sister Yuria unleashes a surge of energy, her hand reaching out as a complex magic circle illuminates the dark room with a sudden, brilliant flash. Eldia is deep in thought, reflecting on how this specific type of holy power is famously effective when used against monsters that are rampaging through the world. However, she begins to suspect that the situation might not be going exactly as her friends intended it to. Eldia realizes that since Albert is perfectly calm and not actually rampaging, the powerful purification spell is nothing more than some harmless bright lights to him. Licht senses the growing danger and calls out for Yuria to get out of there, warning her that their opponent is far stronger than he looks. Amidst the chaos, Yuria reaches for Eldia and urgently pleads for her lady to come along. Albert screams for the intruders to unhand his mistress. As she is whisked away from the scene, Eldia can only feel a twinge of guilt, silently offering an apology to Yuria for the overwhelming mess. Eldia decides she has finally had enough of the chaos, stomping her bare foot down with a heavy thud. She firmly yanks her hands away from the hero and the priestess. The entire group is caught off guard as a surge of dark, shadowy energy erupts from the princess, instantly coiling around Licht, Yuria, and even her own butler, Albert. Licht realizes that Eldia has just used a powerful and unexpected form of magic to take control of the situation. Eldia's transition into her full authority as she lets out a thunderous command for absolute silence from everyone present. She sternly reminds her uninvited guests that this is her own private domicile. A tense and quiet stillness falls over the room as the powerful bonds hold all three legendary figures in place. Eldia admits that while her late-night visitors were certainly quite rude to break in the way they did, she has concluded that they were simply acting out of a deep and sincere worry for her well-being. She politely asks Albert if he could hold off on his plan to expel them for just a little while longer. Albert manages to look remarkably composed despite his current predicament, stating that before anything else happens, he would truly appreciate a thorough explanation for the bizarre scene unfolding in the room. Eldia notes with a hint of mock amazement that her visitors are still quite fond of her and actually want to prove her innocence, though she concludes with a sigh that she simply cannot choose to go with them. She puts on her best mysterious expression as she addresses her servant, asking if he hasn't already figured out the truth of the situation for himself. The truth is she has absolutely no clue why the heroes are so weirdly attached to her in the first place. She realizes with a sense of growing desperation that she needs to come up with a believable cover story to get them to leave peacefully and finds herself sending out a mental distress signal for her butler to help her out. Albert gives a subtle and reassuring nod, proving to Eldia that he has once again caught on to her secret intentions with remarkable speed. Albert starts to retract his terrifying weapon, the blood chains sliding back toward his hand with a soft whooshing sound. Albert looks at the princess with a calm and steady gaze, telling her that she hasn't actually become as deeply steeped in evil as she seems to believe. He explains that her supposedly villainous actions have actually had a positive influence on a great many people, including both the legendary hero and the holy priestess. Albert remains perfectly serious as he suggests that if it hadn't been for the unlucky circumstances surrounding her birth, she likely could have lived her entire life in a much brighter and more peaceful world. Eldia speaks his name in a soft and bewildered tone. Albert leans in close to her face and looks directly into her eyes, admitting that despite everything, she was the one who ultimately allowed him to develop genuine feelings for her. Eldia realizes that his confession is very shocking news to her. She finds herself in a state of utter panic as Albert's hand slides over her own. Sister Yuria watches the scene from the background, letting out a small gasp of surprise as she sees the butler suddenly pull the princess away with a firm and purposeful tug. Albert continued his intense confession, recalling the moment Eldia first allowed him to pierce her skin with his fangs as a damper. He looks at her with deep longing, admitting that since that day, he has spent every moment waiting for the time when she would finally be freed from the heavy fate she carries as the notorious princess. Albert slowly starts to slide his hand away, telling her that if her true wish is still to leave with the hero and the priestess, he will simply vanish from her life. Eldia suddenly realizes that her butler is being absolutely brilliant, as he is clearly using this dramatic scene as a perfect chance for them to make a quick getaway. She figures that he is intentionally trying to make them look like a pair of tragic, star-crossed lovers to trick the heroes and she decides that playing with their emotions is definitely the most effective way to secure their escape. The princess's inner struggle as she finds that her own heart is pounding so loudly that she is worried it might actually burst right out of her chest. She pulls Albert with a sudden burst of frantic energy, shouting in mind that they should just go ahead and do this. Eldia leans in close to her butler, her expression filled with a sudden and intense determination as she tells him that he is sorely mistaken if he truly believes her to be the kind of woman who would ever break a promise she has made. Albert looks back at her with a gaze that is incredibly focused as she tells how many times she needs to remind him that he is and always will be her top priority. The princess is a total mess of emotions, thinking to herself that he has always been her absolute best boy, whether it was in her favorite game or right here in the real world. She admits that she has no idea what she is even trying to say anymore, but she figures that this dramatic display should be enough to convince their audience. Eldia turns away from the intense moment with her butler to face her uninvited guests once again. Eldia offers a bright and cheerful smile to the stunned hero and priestess, announcing that she unfortunately has a very important prior arrangement with her butler that she simply cannot ignore. She politely concludes that she is afraid she will not be able to go with them. The hero and the priestess are caught in a total daze, nodding along in frantic agreement. Eldia reflects on the absurdity of the situation, noting to herself that the dramatic performance her butler just put on was certainly quite a show. The light-hearted mood suddenly shifts as Sister Yuria experiences a violent shudder. Licht notices her distress immediately and asks her what is happening. Yuria's expression turns serious, and she announces that the gate to the underworld has finally been forced open. She warns everyone that dangerous monsters are already beginning to emerge. Licht asks for the exact location of the breach, so they can intervene. Yuria confirms that the chaos is currently unfolding right in the middle of town. Albert, standing behind the princess, asks if this is the specific incident she had mentioned to him before. Eldia looks ahead with a grim and focused expression, confirming her belief. Eldia explains the mechanics of her world to her butler, noting that this specific disaster is usually triggered when the vile princess activates a powerful magic item. Since she does not actually own any such object, she concludes that the attack must be a predetermined event, much like the other unavoidable stories they have been forced to navigate in the past. The princess reflects on her previous attempts to change the course of history, remembering how she tried to avert various incidents that were destined to end in high casualties. She feels regret as she recalls that despite her best efforts, she could not stop the destruction of the hero's village or prevent the priestess from being injured so badly that she nearly lost her life. She realizes that her estate is simply too far from the city to prevent a total bloodbath. She understands that no matter how much they hurry, the damage will be done by the time they arrive, so she concludes that the best possible outcome is for the hero and the priestess to be the ones who eventually stop the monster strike. Licht declares that they must leave at once because they have a duty to try even if they might not be in time to save everyone. Yuria offers a firm and enthusiastic agreement. Yuria offers her a final, beaming smile and asks the princess to wait for them, promising with total sincerity that they will return to protect her. Eldia notes to herself that these two never hesitate to save people no matter the circumstances. Suddenly, Eldia calls out for everyone to wait, causing Licht and Yuria to stop their frantic preparations. Eldia tells a hypothetical scenario where she might actually possess the rare and powerful magic required to transport them both to the heart of the city in a single instant. The two heroes stand by the shattered window, staring back at Eldia as they try to process the weight of her offer. Eldia flashes a mischievous smile, pointing out the suspicious coincidence of her having such an incredibly convenient spell already prepared for this exact moment. She asks if they would still be willing to place their total trust in her. Licht and Yuria react with a burst of pure joy, letting out a loud shout that they would of course believe in her. Eldia is visibly moved by the unwavering trust the hero and priestess have placed in her. The princess smiles with a faint blush, reflecting on how much she truly loves the pair for being such precious and genuine souls. Eldia firmly grips her butler's hand to begin her spell, noting to herself that while her shadow magic is practically useless for hurting people, it turns out to be incredibly effective for a wide variety of other tasks. She prepares to unleash her power and a sudden rush of dark energy that swirls around her. The unique nature of her ability to transport objects and people by connecting different shadows, though she acknowledges that the technique is limited to locations she has already marked. She feels fortunate that she had the foresight to place a secret mark near the center of town, allowing her to facilitate the hero's immediate arrival at the very heart of the crisis. Eldia looks ahead with a bright expression as she unleashes the full force of her magic with a powerful command for the heroes to go forth. Licht and Yuria are being enveloped by the shadow magic. Their figures started to dissolve into the darkness. Eldia waves her hand toward the empty space by the window, noting with a sense of relief that the transport seems to have worked perfectly and that her friends have made it all right. Eldia turns back to face her butler with an apologetic expression, acknowledging that she knows he must be exhausted after such a chaotic night. Despite his tiredness, she insists that they need to make their own escape and get out of the estate immediately. Albert looks at her with a slightly puzzled expression, wondering aloud if she truly plans to leave without waiting for the hero and the priestess to return. Eldia lets out a small chuckle, explaining that while the work of the vile princess is officially finished, her true self still has a long list of things she needs to accomplish. She notes that if she lingers in this location for too long, the complex web of events she has carefully designed will likely fall apart, an observation that Albert acknowledges as being a very true and practical point. The princess leans in with a blush as she admits that she simply cannot stay because being forced to look at her favorite characters all day, every day would make it impossible for her to keep her composure. Albert notes that his mistress truly never ceases to amaze him with her unique way of thinking. Eldia notices a subtle change in her servant's demeanor and asks him if something is bothering him. Albert quickly shifts his gaze and looks away with a sweat on his face, insisting that there is nothing wrong. Albert casually mentions that they did indeed have some uninvited guests, but he has already taken the initiative to handle every single one of them. Eldia shouts in total shock about the fact that her favorite heroes actually did break into her bedroom. The princess notices a dark, jagged tear and a fresh stain of blood on her butler's shoulder. She realizes he was actually hurt during the intense skirmish. Eldia rushes forward to check on her servant with a worried expression. He observes with a touch of quiet amusement that he seems to test her ability to remain in control of herself far more than the legendary heroes ever managed to do. Eldia, in a fit of adorable frustration, demands that Albert allow her the right to worry about his well-being. She insists that since he is her absolute favorite boy, her concern is only natural. Albert acknowledges her words with a calm expression, concluding that her worry must stem entirely from the fact that he was her favorite character back in the world of the game. Eldia lets out a soft sound of confusion, flatly stating that her current feelings have absolutely nothing to do with the game she once played. A sudden shock ripples through Albert as he processes her unexpected confession. Eldia admits that while she certainly loved the version of him from the digital world, that character is not the same as the man who is standing right in front of her. She reminds him that they have been together nearly every moment since she first arrived in this body, and she declares that while he remains her favorite, he has also become her actual family over the years. Albert repeats the word family with a look of pure confusion. Eldia notices his bewildered tone and immediately snaps at him to ask what that expression is supposed to mean, even though in her mind she is screaming in total panic, wondering if she is accidentally getting far too close to him for comfort. Eldia quickly tries to backtrack by claiming that her comment about being family was just a random example, but she continues her confession by admitting that she has actually loved him since her previous life. She tells him that she was totally obsessed with him back then and feels incredibly lucky that she has managed to spend so much time by his side in this reality. Eldia looks down with a soft expression, admitting that her deep feelings make her want to keep him close, even though being near him often makes her forget her own composure. She clarifies that regardless of her selfish desire to stay by his side, she still firmly believes that his personal happiness remains the most important thing to her. Eldia's face goes pale as she wonders to herself what on earth she is even saying to him right now. Albert stares at her in a state of absolute and stunned silence. She explains that her goal is simply to avoid mixing up the person she knew from the digital world with the actual man standing before her. She covers her face, begging her butler to just forget every single word she just said. Albert asks if her words mean that in her heart, he is no longer the favorite character he used to be back in the game. Eldia lets out a frantic shout of total frustration, admitting that while he is definitely still a favorite, he has become something far more special to her now. Albert's stoic mask completely melts away, replaced by a gaze that is remarkably soft. Eldia finds herself lost in the brilliance of his eyes. The princess suddenly pulls herself back into her fangirl mindset, reflecting on the idea that she is technically supposed to stand back and adore her favorites from a safe distance. She tries to convince herself that merely wishing for their happiness from afar is the most proper way to live. Eldia reflects on her complicated feelings for her butler, realizing that she has spent years preparing herself for the inevitable moment when she might have to let him go. She admits to herself that she doesn't want to lose him. She decides that she simply cannot allow herself to indulge in such presumptuous thoughts. Albert begins to stagger. His body slumps forward with a weary groan as his strength finally gives out. Eldia rushes to catch him as he slumps against her, her voice filled with panic as she asks her beloved butler if he is actually all right. Albert rests his head on the princess's shoulder as he offers a soft apology for his sudden weakness, admitting that he took a direct hit from a silver weapon during the earlier confrontation. He explains with a faint and tired voice that using his remaining life force to create a chain from his own blood was likely a step too far. Eldia enters a state of comedic distress, her expression shifting into a cartoonish display of frustration as she demands to know why he didn't mention his injury before he took on so much. She feels a wave of sincere regret and apologizes for asking him to take care of everything when he was already suffering. Eldia looks a bit dazed as she considers the grim possibility that they might not actually be able to make their escape tonight after all. Albert leans in close to her neck as he softly asks for her permission to bite her so he can regain his lost strength. Eldia regains her focus and insists that they must get moving before the others finish their battle, telling him that he needs to be at 100% for the journey ahead. Albert acknowledges her command and reaches out to firmly grip her waist, advising his mistress that she should also steel herself. Eldia is in a state of total bewilderment as her butler pulls her into his space, leaving her mind to wonder exactly what is happening. Albert reaches out with a steady hand to gently slide the fabric of the princess's dress aside, bearing her shoulder as he prepares to recover his strength. Albert leans in as he finally bites into her skin. Eldia's eyes go wide as she experiences a wave of unfamiliar sensations. She reflects on the fact that when a vampire drinks blood, they instinctively hypnotize their victim, but since Albert is not a pure vampire, he is often unable to keep his powers in check. Because of his nature as a damper, his own deep feelings end up bleeding through to her, a phenomenon she hasn't experienced in years because he had grown so much better at controlling himself lately. She admits to herself that she was completely wrong about his previous reactions, as she had always assumed he was only trembling because he hated the act of drinking blood, but she now understands that the truth was something else entirely. She realizes she can feel the sheer intensity of Albert's gratitude, jealousy, and frustration. She is stunned to find his anger and annoyance clashing with a sense of pure delight and fondness, making her realize that she had no idea such a passionate heat was burning deep inside him. As he finishes, Albert lets out a long and satisfied exhale. Albert looks directly at Eldia and declares that those intense emotions are exactly how he feels, asking her if she truly understands the weight of his confession. Eldia begins to stammer in total panic, realizing that everything he said earlier to Licht and Yuria might not have been just for show. Albert remains perfectly composed, explaining that the most convincing lies are always created by mixing in a significant amount of truth. Albert offers a small, knowing smile as he admits that he originally intended to simply bide his time while serving by her side without ever revealing his true heart. He notes with a sense of quiet satisfaction that she has finally started to see him as a man. Eldia tries to salvage her dignity by frantically insisting that her reaction is nothing new, claiming that she always gets worked up and starts blushing whenever she is around him. Albert reaches out with a gloved hand to gently brush a lock of hair from her face, softly agreeing that she most certainly does get flustered easily. He looks at her with a tender, blushing expression of his own. Albert gently touches Eldia's face with his gloved hand, as he asks her if she has any idea how she looks at this very moment. Albert wears a playful expression, teasingly notes that based on her earlier confession, he could likely seduce her without even trying. Eldia suddenly transitions into a state of comedic shock, her mind racing at the mere mention of the word seduce, while her face turns a bright shade of red. Albert flashes a bright smile that reveals his sharp fangs, telling the princess never to fear because he has every intention of staying by her side until she finally grows sick of him. Eldia buries her face in her hands in a fit of total embarrassment, desperately wondering to herself how her life could have possibly ended up in such a chaotic state. Albert leans in with a confident gaze as he tells the princess that he is hardly the sort of man who would ever lose a competition to a version of himself that does not even exist. Albert notes with a touch of quiet satisfaction that he must truly be someone special. Eldia lets out a loud and frantic cry, clutching her head in a state of absolute panic while she wonders how her life could have possibly reached such a chaotic point. Albert's expression softens as he begins to reflect more deeply on the princess's earlier confession, wondering to himself if he has interpreted the true nature of her feelings correctly. Eldia surrenders to her emotions as she lets out a desperate scream, admitting with a face full of embarrassment that he is her absolute favorite person in existence. She declares with a burst of frantic honesty that in this very moment, he is seriously her number one above all others. The princess internally shrieks about her own stupidly honest mouth, cursing the fact that her deepest feelings have escaped her control. Eldia admits to herself that, despite her massive embarrassment, she is honestly very happy with how things have turned out. She reflects on the incredible reality that the person she once adored from afar is now standing right there in the flesh. She internal struggles as she pouts with a red face, realizing that she is completely unable to take her eyes off her butler. Her heart practically melts when she sees Albert break into a bright laugh. The story transitions to a picturesque coastal landscape where the air is warm and the palm trees are plenty. Once the dramatic ordeal of facing her supposed evil deeds is finally over, the princess makes her grand exit from her homeland. She successfully relocates to the neighboring kingdom of Istoire, settling into a lavish estate nestled within the charming resort town of Riso de Agua. The princess takes the proactive step of securing a fresh set of legal papers for herself. She decides to operate under the sophisticated alias of Elua Howard, reinventing her persona as a high-level financier with a conveniently mysterious history. Every single staff member who once worked for her directly makes the bold choice to join her in exile. Eldia thinks of the legendary heroes. She sends out a silent apology to Yuria and Licht, feeling a bit guilty for slipping away so quietly while they were busy saving the day. The new reality of her daily life is one of leisure and refined comfort. She spends her time lounging in a chair by the sunlit window, catching up on the latest headlines while enjoying a hot cup of tea. The news pages are crowded with columns of text and illustrations that capture the latest gossip and heroic exploits. Eldia looks down at the paper with a delighted expression, thinking to herself about how incredibly hard the hero and the priestess are working to fulfill their destinies. Suddenly, Albert slides a new book onto the table. Albert leans in slightly and suggests that his mistress likely wants to take the lead and handle the next steps herself. A look of total self-satisfaction crosses the princess's face as she reflects on how her butler knows her better than anyone else in the world. Her mind briefly drifts back to the intensity of that fateful night, remembering how Albert finally confessed the deep and burning feelings he had been struggling to hide for years. She recalls how she followed his confession by dropping a massive emotional bombshell of her own. She reflects on the fact that quite a bit of time has passed since they shared those shocking revelations and made their daring escape. Watching him work, Eldia reflects on how he is definitely the type of man who maintains a strict boundary between his official duties and his personal life. The princess is certain that this return to their usual routine is exactly what is happening. She admits to herself that it has finally given her racing heart a chance to settle down. Eldia muses that Albert might have become just a little less stiff in the way he speaks to her lately. She concludes that a slight change in his tone is only natural, given that they are no longer living the same high-pressure lives as they were before. Albert addresses her as Lady Elua in his smooth voice. The unexpected sound of her new name causes the princess to let out a startled squawk of surprise. Eldia quickly tries to salvage her dignity, offering a nervous and slightly smug little smile. Eldia giggles nervously and admits to herself that the way her butler addresses her often makes her behave quite strangely. She reflects on how his voice sometimes sounds as sweet as honey whenever he says her name. The princess enters a state of comedic distress as she laments the fact that she was just finally getting used to having her favorite character around her after 10 long years of living together. She feels like it is killing her now that he has upgraded himself to the status of a super favorite. She lets out an internal scream, finding it rather annoying that her butler is so perfectly cool with their current situation while she is a total mess. However, she quickly reconciles with her feelings by acknowledging that since he is so incredibly attractive, she is perfectly willing to overlook her irritation and accept his calm demeanor as part of his charm. Albert leans in with a handsome expression as he asks if there is something bothering her, noticing her slight hesitation. He calmly expresses that he would truly appreciate the opportunity for them to sit down and discuss their specific plans for going forward. Eldia agrees that she has finally managed to relax for the first time in what feels like forever. She suggests that since they have finally found this peace away from the drama of the kingdom, it is probably the right time for them to start thinking seriously about what their future holds. Albert observes his mistress with quiet amusement, pointing out that she has spent every moment of their time in this new home deeply immersed in her favorite collection. Eldia remembers how her entire life was consumed by the complex preparations for her big confrontation with the heroes. She realizes that she was so busy ensuring the script went perfectly that she didn't get to do anything nice for herself at all. The princess admits that she eventually began to go through a bit of a withdrawal after not being able to touch her collection for several months. So, she revels in her books without a single care for who might be looking at her. She concedes with a bit of a blush that she probably overdid her celebration. While the past few days of indulgence have been absolutely amazing, Eldia reminds herself that her favorites are still out there working incredibly hard to fight the powerful demon. She feels a sudden surge of inspiration, realizing that supporting them in their struggle is her sacred duty as a fan. She decides that she should probably stop being lazy and get back to work to ensure their victory. Eldia focuses intensely on her research as she tracks the progress of the heroes' party, noting that Licht and his companions have officially set out on the next leg of their journey. Based on everything they have accomplished so far, she is fairly certain that the main story is progressing just fine without her direct interference. She concludes that she should start preparing the various limited events that are meant to take place in all the specific locations where the heroes are likely to stop by. Albert calmly presents a detailed document to the princess, noting that she has successfully made strategic investments in several different locations across the land. He hands over the latest reports on her substantial profits. Eldia offers thanks as she begins to flip through her materials with a focused expression. She reflects on the current season and concludes that given the time of year, the most intriguing and anticipated events are undoubtedly the ones featuring the characters in their swimsuits. Albert seems a bit lost as he acknowledges the mention of swimming with a look of genuine confusion. Eldia enthusiastically confirms his suspicion, explaining that these specific in-game events are vital for leveling up the characters effectively. She adds that they also provide a perfect opportunity for fans to see a completely different and more relaxed side of everyone involved. The princess describes the simple logic of the season, pointing out that in the summer, the natural and expected thing to do is go to the beach. She adds that being at the beach inevitably leads to the arrival of swimsuits. Eldia lets out a burst of laughter as she recalls the sheer number of times she swiped her credit card in her previous life just for the chance to see all her favorite characters in swimsuits. Albert looks over the financial documents and realizes the true reason behind his mistress's massive spending spree in the resort town. He notes that her heavy investments were the key to the location's sudden prosperity, and he points out that she has managed to turn quite a fair profit in the process. The princess reflects on her strategic choice to use this specific town as her secret base of operations, knowing that as the main story continues to unfold, the legendary summer swimsuit event is the very next thing scheduled to happen. To make sure the setting is perfect for her favorite characters, she has been directing Albert and her other loyal helpers to conduct thorough research, slowly but surely preparing the entire town for the upcoming festivities. Eldia reviews her progress, noting that she has personally overseen the development of a fashionable line of swimwear and worked hard to popularize the activity of swimming in the ocean. She smiles with a high degree of confidence, firmly believing that her careful planning will ensure that everything goes exactly as she intended. Albert notes that despite her new life in exile, she remains completely dedicated to providing behind-the-scenes assistance to the legendary hero and the holy priestess. The princess declares with total certainty that every single thing she does is for the ultimate benefit of her favorite characters. Then she realizes she might have let her fangirl motivations show a bit too clearly. Albert watches his mistress with an admiring expression, noting that he truly loves seeing her so devoted to enjoying herself. With a playful glint in his eyes and a smirk, Albert encourages her to carry on with her enthusiastic fangirling exactly as she wishes. He adds that he is already well aware of his own special place in her heart. Eldia lets out a cry as she demands to know how he can possibly say such incredibly bold and embarrassing things with a straight face. The princess looks at her butler and wonders where he could have possibly picked up such effective seduction skills during his years of service. Albert breaks into a sincere laugh, admitting that unlike his mistress, he does not simply throw his affection at every person who happens to cross his path. He declares that her attention is the only thing in the entire world he truly wishes for. Eldia collapses face down onto the table. She is completely overwhelmed by the butler's charms, thinking to herself that his handsome face is nothing short of a lethal weapon. She clutches her head in a desperate attempt to hide her blushing face, screaming internally about how incredibly awkward the entire situation has become. She looks dazed as her mind spins with the realization that her absolute best boy has finally turned his full attention toward her. She reflects on how she has always loved him and been totally devoted to his character, but now that there is no question about how he really feels, she is left in a state of absolute bewilderment. She finds herself completely unable to figure out how a mere fan like her is supposed to deal with the reality of her favorite person loving her back. Eldia notes that having spent 10 years together as mistress and servant makes his change in behavior feel incredibly jarring and makes her feel quite self-conscious. She realizes that her discomfort stems from her lifelong preference for fictional characters over actual romance, a habit she carried even from her previous existence. With basically zero experience in the world of real-life relationships, she feels like a total beginner facing a challenge. She finds herself wondering why he could not have just waited a little bit longer before being so charming, at least until she had managed to get a proper grip on her own runaway emotions. Eldia looks over her plans, noting that considering all their preparations, the legendary swimsuit event is bound to happen without any problems. She suggests that they should simply monitor the hero's progress and be prepared to take action the moment the festivities begin. She adds that they will carry out their observations under the professional excuse of conducting final inspections. Albert accepts her instructions, promising to inform the rest of the staff about their upcoming schedule. Eldia can hardly contain her excitement, her face lighting up with a mischievous grin. The princess reflects on the grueling decade she spent playing the part of a villain, realizing that she has been so overwhelmed with duties that she never actually had a chance to enjoy the world of her favorite game before the main plot kicked off. Now that she is officially retired from her role as the vile princess, she feels a rush of energy, knowing that she is finally free to do whatever her heart desires. With a sudden burst of pure adrenaline and a thumbs up, she declares that it is finally time for them to head straight for the casino. Albert sighs and closes his eyes, noting that if her goal was simply to locate the famous casino from the game, She really should have just said so from the start. He admits, he genuinely feared his mistress might have finally lost her mind. As they make their way through the cobbled streets, Albert effortlessly carrying their heavy suitcase, Eldia demands to know what his previous comment was even supposed to mean. Albert maintains a perfectly serious expression, noting that because she has been so completely and visibly invested in the lives of the hero and the priestess, her sudden interest in a place like a gambling hall felt entirely out of character. He admits that he actually began to worry that she might have fallen under the influence of some strange and powerful curse. The princess looks at him with an annoyed expression, offering a dry word of thanks for what she considers to be a very bizarre form of trust. A pair of elegant feet take a purposeful step toward a grand and imposing structure that is clearly labeled as the town's main casino. Eldia lets out a shout that they have finally arrived at the legendary location. Eldia leads the way into the heart of the grand building, the rhythmic click of her boots echoing through the halls as Albert and her other loyal staff follow closely behind. As the doors swing wide, the girl is met with a dazzling display of opulence that leaves her looking completely mesmerized. She sees the staff members expertly managing the various counters and tables, exactly as they did in the original game. Eldia is practically vibrating with the pure joy of seeing her favorite fictional setting come to life right in front of her very eyes. However, she quickly reminds herself that she must maintain her composure, worrying that getting too carried away might result in her being thrown out for making a scene in such a prestigious establishment. One of the staff members pauses in his work to offer a polite and professional bow, expressing his sincere gratitude for their visit today. Eldia finds herself fixated on the man's clothing, noting that his uniform is an exact replica of the stylish outfit she once saw in the digital world. Eldia claps her hands together, telling herself that she simply must see every single inch of this place. The polite casino attendant suggests that the princess should begin by registering her arrival, asking her exactly how many chips she would like to purchase for her stay. Eldia turns toward her loyal butler and casually proposes that they start by spending half of the funds they brought with them. Albert hesitates for a moment, but he eventually lets out a soft acknowledgement and agrees. A massive and staggering mountain of high-value bills is placed onto a small serving tray. The casino attendant stares down at the tray in stunned silence and lets out a shock of confusion. Eldia flashes a bright smile and asks if there is any particular problem. The casino attendant scrambles away in a total panic, frantically assuring the princess that there isn't a problem at all while he hurries to exchange her massive pile of cash. Albert looks at her with a weary concern, pointing out that she really spent far too much money in a single moment. He notes that the amount she just dropped on the table is roughly 10 times more than what a normal person would ever spend. Eldia explains with total conviction that spending this kind of money is exactly the same as swiping her credit card for her favorite characters back in her previous life. She views this legendary location as a literal holy land and feels a sacred duty to offer her full support, vowing to keep pouring funds into the establishment until the hero's party finally arrives. She continues her explanation, noting that since she is still technically quite young to be seen in a casino, she needs to find a way to be taken seriously as a high-ranking guest. She concludes that the most effective way to ensure the staff treats her like a valued customer rather than a curious child is to make a massive financial statement right from the very start. Albert acknowledges that her logic is surprisingly sound in its own bizarre way, yet he still finds himself at a total loss for words. The casino attendant returns with a polite smile, offering a sincere apology for the brief delay. He carries a tray overflowing with perfectly organized stacks of chips, ready for action as he asks the princess which specific game she is interested in playing today. Eldia doesn't hesitate for a single second and declares that she would like to kick things off with a round of roulette. With the sharp, purposeful click of her heels echoing against the floor, the princess approaches the high-stakes area. A massive, staggering mountain of chips is presented on the table right next to the spinning roulette wheel. A wave of shocked murmurs ripples through the gathered crowd of guests as they stare in total disbelief at the sheer scale of the chips being played. Taking her seat at the velvet table, Eldia adopts a look of serious focus. She ponders her very first move, reflecting on the fact that while she knows the rules of the game perfectly since it was a famous minigame from the original digital world, experiencing it in the flesh feels like a much more exciting challenge. The dealer waits with a practiced patience, asking the princess to place her bet as the game is about to begin. Eldia reaches out with a steady hand and carefully places a single chip on the board. The roulette wheel spins with a rhythmic clatter, the small white ball bouncing across the numbers before finally settling into a winning slot. Eldia looks on with a stunned expression, hardly able to believe her luck as she realizes that she managed to win right off the bat on her very first try. A wave of excited murmurs fills the room as the other guests begin to clamor. The princess adopts a suspicious expression, convinced that there must be something fundamentally wrong with this specific table. A guy frantically pleads for a chance to stay, insisting with total desperation that he is absolutely certain he will win the next round. A senior manager offers a polite bow as he suggests that they should probably move their conversation to a much more private room. The room settles into a strange quiet as the staff members make their exit, leaving only the soft sound of the roulette wheel as it continues its endless spin. The princess narrows her eyes and gazes behind. Albert uses a discreet series of silent signals to convey his urgent desire for them to find a much more private place to talk. Catching the signal, the princess offers a quick and confident smile to show she understands the necessity of his request. Albert addresses that the games in this establishment are entirely rigged. He concludes that the unfortunate man who was just dragged away must have been the latest mark for the casino's deceptive tactics. Albert stands by with his usual composed expression and observes that he believes his suspicions were correct because the dealer appears to be manually manipulating the movement of the wheel itself. The princess is suddenly overcome with grief, clutching her fist while she laments the heartbreaking discovery that her beloved Holy Land has turned out to be nothing more than a dishonest and dirty gambling hall. The white ball clatters rhythmically against the edge of the spinning roulette wheel before finally sliding into a slot as the winning numbers are revealed. Eldia notes the chilling possibility that she is intended to be the next victim of their scheme, to which Albert bluntly confirms that she is indeed the casino's primary target. Albert continues his explanation by noting that the staff has likely been allowing her to win small victories specifically to lure her deeper into their trap, causing a mischievous glint to appear in the princess's eyes as she realizes they have made the grave mistake of looking down on her. Albert looks at his mistress with a calm gaze, confirming that the casino staff has indeed made the foolish mistake of underestimating her. Eldia settles into her seat and reflects on how frustrating it is to find her precious Holy Land tarnished by dishonesty the moment she finally arrives. She decides that if the staff is determined to cheat, it is only fair that she gives them a taste of their own medicine, concluding that a sense of proper order is something that is needed in every corner of the world. Albert admits that he fully expected her to take such a bold approach and gives his approval. Eldia asks for his professional guidance on exactly where she should place her bets to ensure her victory. Albert asks just how much wealth she intends to walk away with today. Her goal is to win more than enough money to simply buy the entire casino for herself. Sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere at the table, the young dealer pauses his work and politely asks if something is the matter. Eldia leans forward with a flushed and energetic expression, assuring the dealer that nothing is wrong because the experience is simply very new to her. She adds that she is having a wonderful time and insists that they should continue the game without further delay. Albert reaches out to place a steadying hand on her shoulder, quietly addressing his concern that she might be getting a bit too carried away. The princess dismissively waves off his concern with a sharp movement, stating that she does not care about the consequences. She continues her playful outburst by pointing toward the betting table as the roulette wheel spins, explaining that she has been cooped up for far too long and deserves to finally have some genuine fun. Looking over the layout of the board, Albert realizes that the staff will grow suspicious if Eldia suddenly shifts her strategy, so he silently instructs her to continue placing column and dozen bets based on the specific numbers he indicates. Eldia slides a stack of chips onto the table with a simple acknowledgement that she understands the plan. This sudden move leaves the dealer looking completely blindsided, his face filled with visible shock. As the roulette wheel continues its clatter, Albert provides more specific guidance, suggesting that she should bet an equal amount on a new section while simultaneously doubling her current stake in the same category to keep the staff off balance. Albert tells her to quadruple her next bet, noting that the current cycle of play is finished and she should return to the fourth step of their strategy. The dealer begins to sweat under the pressure, his composure visibly cracking as he watches her pile of chips grow. Eldia reflects on the fact that she is deliberately placing her bets before the ball is even dropped, knowing that while the dealer should technically be able to manipulate the outcome, he is currently finding it impossible to do so. She realizes that her success is entirely due to her own secret intervention, as she is using her shadow magic to subtly alter the rotation speed of the wheel. The dealer is completely unnerved by the realization that he has lost all control over where the ball finally lands, unaware that the princess is the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. Eldia can hardly contain her glee as she cheers for her own success, pointing out with a wide smile that the dealer is visibly dripping with sweat. The sound of rhythmic footsteps echoes across the polished floor as a group of people moves through the crowd, signaling their arrival with a polite request for others to step aside. Albert warns the princess, noting that the management is clearly bringing out their most experienced staff to handle the situation and suggests that it is time for them to be on their guard. Eldia maintains her poise and offers a simple word of acknowledgement. A new man with a practiced smile places a firm hand on the trembling dealer's shoulder, observing that his colleague does not seem to be feeling well and offering to step in and take over the game himself. Eldia rests her hand near her winnings, casually noting that the sudden change in staff is quite an interesting development. She lets out a soft sigh and mentions that she is actually starting to feel a bit tired. Eldia playfully suggests that she might as well go all in on her very next move. Before her stands a massive and staggering mountain of chips. While the new dealer recognizes that this moment has become a desperate struggle, the princess understands that her own motivations are something entirely different. Eldia turns toward her butler with an expectant look and asks Albert if he would like to be the one to officially place this final and decisive bet. The season manager is struck by a wave of pure shock as he listens to her bold proposal. Albert offers a nervous glance toward her and suggests that she must surely be joking about such a reckless move, but a sharp and determined glint in Eldia's eye reveals that she has never been more serious. Albert locks eyes with the manager, a literal spark of tension snapping between them. With a subtle movement and a sharp exhale from the manager, Albert's supernatural charm takes hold. Albert secretly informs the princess that he has successfully secured control over the manager's will through his powers of suggestion, asking her which specific number she would like to choose for her final bet. Without a moment of hesitation, Eldia declares her choice to be number 26. Albert can only watch her, noting that his mistress truly never changes when it comes to her obsessions. Eldia adopts pouting expression, as she reflects on how natural it is for a dedicated fangirl to use a number related to their favorite person in a high-stakes moment, especially since 26 happens to be Albert's actual age in this world. Standing before her staggering mountain of chips, Eldia officially announces her decision to go with number 26 as the roulette wheel begins its final spin. The ball clatters into the slot for number 26, sending a shockwave through the room as the crowd erupts into a thunderous roar of excitement. The manager stands frozen at the table, his face pale and dripping with sweat as he watches his desperate attempt to save the casino's reputation. Eldia watches the scene with a sharp and triumphant smile. She is politely requested to relax for a moment while the staff scrambles to organize the massive mountain of funds she has won. Eldia cheers for their successful afternoon and declares that the entire experience was even more fun than she could have ever imagined. The princess acknowledges that while she did not win quite enough money to buy the entire casino as she had originally hoped, she is still very pleased with the fact that her winnings were large enough to deal a serious blow to their finances. Albert acknowledges that the substantial winnings have dealt a significant blow to the casino's finances. Eldia settles onto the sofa with a curious expression as she wonders what the management might try to do next in response to her victory. Albert explains that a standard casino would usually try to keep a lucky guest in an affiliated hotel and delay the payout to encourage them to gamble more as a way to mitigate their losses. He continues by observing that in a dishonest place like this, there is a good chance they might choose to skip the pleasantries and simply cast her into the darkness if she is deemed a lost cause, which Eldia acknowledges with a playful note that she had already figured as much. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of the casino's manager, who offers a deep bow and an oily apology while claiming that the immense size of her winnings is the only reason cashing out is taking a bit longer. Eldia leans back on the plush sofa with a smile, suggesting that if the payout is going to be such a burden, she is perfectly happy to have the casino transfer the funds to her various accounts in small installments over time. The manager reacts with immediate horror, bowing even deeper as he insists that he could never dream of inconveniencing the president of the Howard Company. He showers her with praise, claiming she is a vital figure who has contributed immensely to the overall welfare and prosperity of the entire town. Eldia plays along, noting that she only ever made a few small investments here and there. Internally, she realizes with a sense of relief that the manager has clearly done his homework on her secret identity, concluding that since he knows she is a powerful financier, the risk of the casino staff trying to eliminate her has dropped to almost zero. The manager maintains his overly polite facade and chuckles at her humility, asserting that the town's current level of luxury is entirely thanks to the generous aid provided by her predecessor. He concludes his flattering speech by admitting that while he is still relatively new to his position in the area, he is already well aware of her incredible reputation and great renown. Eldia listens to his smooth words. Eldia finds the manager's praise hilarious because the predecessor he keeps mentioning doesn't actually exist outside of her own imagination. The princess reflects on the origins of her business empire, remembering how she established the Howard Company as a strategic front when she was only 12 or 13 years old. To maintain the illusion of a legitimate enterprise, she frequently had Albert don a disguise to look like an older gentleman and act as the rising financier leading the company. She recalls the final stage of her secret plan, where she officially killed off the fictional first-generation president once she had secured her own freedom. She seamlessly transitioned into the role of the new head of the business by posing as his daughter, a complex secret that remains known only to her most trusted inner circle. Eldia decides she might as well lean into the role and push the situation as far as it can possibly go. Letting out a weary sigh, the princess rests her chin on her hand and tells the manager that she only visited the casino for a brief moment of relaxation. She mentions that she has many other important places to be and asks if she is finally free to make her departure. The manager leans forward with a sweaty, oily grin and mentions that he has a small proposal he would like to share with the princess. Eldia maintains her casual posture while she asks what that proposal might be, prompted by the manager's observation that she appears to be an exceptionally skilled gambler. With an expansive gesture, the manager asks if she would be interested in participating in a game that is far more interesting and stimulating than the one she just played. Eldia reflects on the description of a stimulating game, internally noting that no matter how she looks at the situation, the offer feels like it must involve something completely illegal. She continues since he is presenting this offer to someone of her high standing in the town. She is fairly certain that the secret venue is something far more elaborate than just another ordinary casino. Eldia expresses her sudden and intense interest by encouraging the manager to share every single detail about his mysterious offer. Internally, she reveals her true motive by noting that she wants to learn everything she can about this operation specifically, so she can dismantle the entire thing right at its very source. The sound of their footsteps echoes through the hallway as Eldia and Albert follow the manager down a long and winding spiral staircase. As the heavy doors swing wide, leaves Eldia in a state of total shock as she finally gets her first look at the hidden world waiting behind the casino walls. The scale of the operation is truly massive, and Eldia gazes out at a staggering coliseum filled with rows upon rows of masked guests who have all gathered to witness the brutal spectacles. She realizes she has entered an underground fight club where spectators can experience the thrill of betting on combatants who are free to use everything from powerful magic to personal weapons. The rules of the establishment are remarkably simple, requiring guests to choose a winner while being fully aware that their bets will be collected immediately if their chosen fighter fails to succeed. The manager gestures toward the shelves of equipment and explains that for an additional optional fee, guests have the power to limit the gear and weaponry provided to the fighters in the arena. Eldia responds with a sarcastic comment about how wonderful the arrangement sounds, while internally she reflects on the reality that the entire operation is actually quite disgusting. The princess is suddenly overcome with internal rage, screaming to herself that the situation is pitch black and incredibly seedy. She finds it hard to believe that the very town she invested so much of her fortune into is involved in such dark activities, leaving her feeling absolutely furious. Looming in the shadows with a grin, the manager informs his guests that the house rule dictates that once a person has entered the Colosseum, they are required to either place at least one bet on a match or pay a substantial entry fee. Eldia acknowledges the situation with a calm tone, while she internally realizes that in order to leave the establishment in one piece, she will likely have to commit to placing a massive bet. Eldia experiences a sudden shudder as she realizes the manager's true intent. She understands that he is likely planning to squeeze a massive fortune out of her to keep his struggling casino afloat, noting that the arbitrary entry fee could easily be whatever exorbitant amount he decides it should be. Looking over at Albert, Eldia notices a dangerous tension radiating from him. She senses that her butler is only seconds away from snapping. Eldia adopts a pouting expression as she listens to the roaring cheers of the crowd. She concludes that now that she has a clear and disappointing understanding of the dark operations occurring here, her best course of action is probably to find a way to get out of the building as quickly as possible. The princess's eyes go wide with total shock as a burly combatant armed with a massive axe steps into the arena. The atmosphere in the Colosseum becomes even more electric as a woman dressed in a stylish bunny outfit and fishnets strides into the spotlight. The woman stands in the center of the arena, her expression carrying a heavy weight. The stadium is filled with the roar of a disrespectful crowd, as the spectators shout Susie demands for her to take off her clothes or kill her opponent while they cheer for the bunny girl. Amidst the noise, the fighter remains silent, her downward gaze reflecting a deep sense of discomfort. Eldia watches the scene with a growing sense of horror and realization, noting that this woman was never meant to be paraded around in such a revealing outfit. She understands that as a true martial artist, the fighter likely despises seeing her craft reduced to a seedy spectacle for a gambling den, and she is clearly struggling with the indignity of the situation. The princess clenches her hand over her heart and reaches out to tug on her butler's sleeve, urgently telling Albert that he needs to pay close attention. Albert looks down at his mistress with a start, wondering if she's been overcome by the intensity of the moment or perhaps something else entirely. Eldia becomes a total mess of emotions, saying that this warrior is actually another one of her absolute favorite characters from the game. The figure standing in the center of the arena is none other than Chikusa Togetsu, a legendary samurai hailing from the distant kingdom of Joa. Eldia recognizes her immediately as a member of the beast folk with distinct rabbit characteristics, recalling from her game knowledge that this warrior was destined to cross paths with the hero while she was on a combat training journey across the continent. The stadium erupts into a thunderous roar of excitement as Chikusa easily stands over her fallen opponent, yet the princess is left in a state of utter confusion as she notices that the girl is winning her matches using nothing more than a simple wooden stick. Leaning over the balcony, Eldia frantically wonders what could have happened to Chikusa's exclusive weapon, the legendary blade that she is supposed to treasure even more than her own life, while Albert looks on with a steady gaze. She asks for the identity of the mysterious woman. The manager lets out a greasy laugh as he explains that the warrior arrived at their establishment already burdened by a massive debt, and since she possesses such a prideful nature, they decided to arrange for her to wear that embarrassing costume purely for the amusement of their guests. The princess responds to the manager's explanation with a dry observation. The manager asks the mistress exactly what she wishes to do next. Eldia gazes at the warrior and wonders if her butler believes he could take her down, noting that since the samurai is currently not at her best, it should be an easy task for him. Albert calmly assures the princess that with just a small amount of reinforcement, he is certain he could corner the fighter. A smug look of satisfaction crosses the girl's face as she lets out a little laugh, silently praising her talented butler for being so reliable. She quickly catches herself and snaps back to reality, realizing that she cannot simply stand by while one of her top favorites is trapped in such a miserable predicament. Eldia tells herself that she absolutely must take action because leaving her beloved character in this state would be unthinkable. Looking back at the manager, Eldia speaks up, catching the man off guard as she calmly informs him that she wants to acquire the rabbit samurai. Eldia looks ahead with a sharp gaze, repeating her decision to acquire the rabbit samurai. The manager begins to sweat as she reminds him that his establishment is intended for gambling and she would truly hate to deprive the other guests of such a popular source of entertainment. A smile spreads across Eldia's face as she suggests a new arrangement, proposing that if her own man is able to win a match against the warrior, she should be allowed to purchase her outright. She continues her bold offer by promising to pay back every cent of the debt the fighter owes, while also providing a substantial convenience fee to ensure the management is well compensated for their loss. Deep down, the princess feels a bit of a struggle because she truly hates the idea of treating one of her favorite characters like a piece of property, but she realizes that the situation will likely go much smoother if she simply chooses to play along with their rules for now. The manager takes a moment to weigh the risks, finally acknowledging that the choice of how to proceed rests entirely with him. He looks toward the quiet man standing beside the princess and asks if the servant will be the one stepping into the arena to fight. Eldia beams with a sudden burst of pride as she confirms her deep fondness for Albert, explaining that while he might not look like a warrior, he is actually remarkably powerful. With a sinister grin, the manager adds a chilling disclaimer, stating that his establishment takes absolutely no responsibility for the death of any combatants who enter the ring. Eldia lets out a delighted laugh and remarks that the added danger only makes the upcoming match feel all the more exciting. The manager officially accepts the wager, promising to relinquish the rabbit samurai if the servant is truly able to best her. Eldia turns toward her butler with a bright smile, noting that since he has heard the manager's terms, she wants him to go forth and secure a victory on her behalf. Albert lowers himself to one knee as he promises to fulfill her wish. Maintaining his humble posture, Albert takes her hand and looks up with a gaze of absolute devotion, declaring that his only focus is achieving victory for his lady. Albert runs his tongue across her hand with a soft licking sound, drinking blood. The sudden display of chivalry leaves Eldia in a state of total shock, and she finds herself blushing as she reflects on how rarely he ever acts so gallant. Sensing her internal state, Albert secretly asks his mistress to keep it down and regain her composure. A look of realization washes over the princess as she covers her mouth, suddenly remembering that she still has their shadows connected through her magic. The Colosseum announcer addresses the gathered crowd, declaring that they have a last-minute special match prepared for their enjoyment as a wave of excited clamor ripples through the stadium. Eldia stands at the balcony with a sense of sudden apprehension. She reflects on the fact that within the original game, Chikusa Tagetsu belongs to the Knight class and serves as a devastating attack unit that specializes in delivering incredibly powerful blows. Meanwhile, the princess notes that Albert is a specialized stealth attacker who excels at striking an opponent's weak points to debuff or immobilize them, even though the digital mechanics suggest he cannot hold his own in a direct, face-to-face battle. Eldia watches with intense focus, acknowledging that regardless of what the game's stats once said, this world is now her actual reality. Eldia looks down at the arena, noting that even though the matchup technically isn't in his favor, she doesn't feel a bit of worry. She understands that while she can't see his current stats, this version of Albert possesses the ability to think before he acts. She reflects on the fact that Chikusa's unique in-game skill is a highly specialized attack, a one-hit kill move powered by sheer speed. In her memories of the digital world, no normal human could ever hope to keep up with the samurai's lethal velocity. As the crowd erupts into a deafening roar of anticipation, the princess acknowledges that the same rules of combat still apply here in reality. A mischievous glint appears in Eldia's eyes with a realization. The air is suddenly filled with a heavy thwack as Albert manages to intercept the samurai's strike with precision. Eldia reflects on the fact that her dear servant isn't actually 100% human. The skirmish begins with a sharp smack as Albert effortlessly parries the Rabbit Samurai's opening move, leaving the seasoned warrior looking completely blindsided by a simple butler's reflexes. With a sudden movement, the girl lunges across the arena like a shadow. The sound of a slide signals the end of the match as Albert's hidden weapon catches the warrior's wooden stick, resulting in a clean snap. The entire arena seems to freeze in a moment of pure shock as Albert pins the defeated samurai against the cold wall. A deafening roar of approval ripples through the crowd as the masked guests go absolutely wild for the victor. Eldia beams with satisfaction, casually announcing that she will be taking the Rabbit Samurai now, exactly as they had previously agreed. The manager's expression darkens as several large, imposing guards suddenly move into position behind him, and he asks Miss Howard to wait right where she is while his staff takes care of wrapping up their business. Adopting a look of confusion, the princess wonders aloud if the massive mountain of chips she just won at the roulette table isn't quite enough to cover the transaction. The manager lets out a mocking laugh, remarking how annoying it is to deal with naive young ladies before coldly informing her that playtime is over and that the usual rules of society simply do not apply in his coliseum. Standing calmly at the balcony above the group, Eldia gazes down at the gathered thugs and insists that this situation is most certainly still a game to her. A sudden, heavy thud echoes through the room. The manager and his guards are suddenly frozen in place, with looks of pure terror, as a violent surge of dark energy erupts from the floor, trapping them in a swirl of shadow magic. Eldia praises Albert for his success in the ring and suggests that it is finally time for them to make their exit. Her butler offers a quiet acknowledgement as he prepares to follow her command and carry the warrior to safety. Offering a bright and cheerful smile to those left behind, the princess announces that she is officially taking her leave and remarks that the entire experience was quite enjoyable. The group vanishes from the underground coliseum in a single instant. Safe within the walls of the grand estate, the Rabbit Samurai kneels on the plush rug and observes that the servant told her of the princess's noble wish to offer her some aid. Chikusa admits that she truly appreciates being taken away from such a horrible and degrading place, while Eldia looks at her with quiet surprise. The warrior stands with a rigid sense of honor, sternly reminding the princess that what she has done today is technically against the law of the land. She makes it clear by declaring that she will never pledge her loyalty or her blade to someone who willingly chooses a life of crime, leaving Eldia looking completely stunned by the samurai's intense moral code. Chikusa continues, admitting that she has no idea what the princess actually expects from her after such a suspicious rescue. She warns that if the intent is to humiliate her further, she will resist with every fiber of her being, firmly demanding to know what Eldia has to say for herself. Rather than offering a logical explanation, Eldia collapses into a state of total fangirl overload, screaming into the floor about how incredibly precious the warrior truly is. The sheer volume of the princess's outburst causes Chikusa to jump in a total panic. Eldia gushes over how cool the samurai is for recognizing her desire to help despite her reputation as a villain and a criminal. She finds the warrior's ability to offer a thank you under such suspicious circumstances to be a display of noble character that is almost too much to bear, leaving her frantically wondering what she could ever do to deserve such preciousness as she loudly calls out for Albert. Albert observes the intense tension in the room and notes that the legendary samurai appears to be quite shocked by the current situation. He suggests that the princess should start the interaction properly by introducing herself first to help ease the awkwardness. With a sudden and energetic movement, Eldia drops into a deep bow that causes Chikusa to let out a startled cry of surprise. The princess loudly introduces herself as Elua Howard, explaining with total enthusiasm that she is the one currently in charge of the Howard Company. Clearly overwhelmed by the sudden shift in atmosphere, she stammers out her own name as she identifies herself as Chikusa Tagetsu. The simple act of the warrior speaking directly to her sends Eldia into another fit of pure fangirl ecstasy as she screams internally about how incredible it is that her favorite character is actually talking to her. Chikusa begins to tremble uncontrollably on the floor, admitting that she is utterly confused because the woman who seemed so bold and free with her actions earlier now feels like an entirely different person. Albert looks down, calmly explaining that while it might be hard to believe, this chaotic and emotional display is actually his mistress's true self. Eldia looks at Chikusa with a serious expression and promises that she truly has no intention of doing anything to cause her harm. She explains that she simply could not stand the thought of leaving the warrior in such a terrible place. Chikusa remains quiet and uncertain, while Eldia continues her declaration by stating that she is determined to crush that casino at all costs. The princess adopts a more intense gaze and asks the samurai if she might be willing to share the story of what exactly happened to lead her into such a predicament. Eldia enters a state of total fangirl chaos, her eyes spinning frenzy as she excitedly shouts that for right now, she just wants to be allowed to throw money at her favorite person. Chikusa lets out a terrified shriek, looking completely overwhelmed as she admits that she is afraid. She has absolutely no idea what the princess is even trying to say to her anymore. Eldia is suddenly struck by a wave of panic as she realizes that her eccentric behavior and fangirl outbursts are likely doing nothing more than scaring off one of her absolute favorite characters. The warrior softens her stance and admits that while the princess clearly does not bear her any ill will, the specific circumstances that led to her ending up at the casino are far too embarrassing for her to share. Eldia responds with a look of determination, promising to help recover the legendary sword known as Hagazuki and asking for the current location of the weapon so they can begin their search. The mention of the sword's name sends a fresh shockwave through the room, causing Chikusa to wonder how a total stranger could possibly know the secret name of her treasured blade. With a calm and knowing expression, Eldia explains that since it is a well-known fact that Chikusa treats Hagazuki like her very soul and never lets it out of her sight, the simple observation that the sword is not in her possession makes it obvious she was only in that horrible place to get it back. Albert quickly places his gloved hand over the princess's mouth, gently advising his mistress to wait because her perfectly accurate deductions are clearly causing the warrior a great deal of emotional distress. Eldia can only make a muffled sound of surprise as she is silenced, while Chikusa looks away with a deep flush of embarrassment on her face. The memory of the ordeal reveals that the samurai was originally offered a place to stay that turned out to be far more expensive than she ever imagined, leaving her heavily burdened by debt before she even realized what was happening. Driven by her honor, she swore she would repay every cent and made the heartbreaking choice to hand over Hagazuki, a blade she views as an extension of her very body, to guarantee her commitment. Albert maintains a steady and serious expression as he observes that the entire unfortunate situation was likely exactly what the casino management intended to happen from the very beginning. Now free to speak again, Eldia notes that it is precisely her stubbornness and unshakable sense of duty that makes her such a wonderful and precious person. She concludes that even though Chikusa felt a moral obligation to pay back the cost of a single meal and a night's rest, the dishonest staff members were almost certainly targeting her legendary blade right from the start. Albert finds herself wondering if a single sword could truly fetch such an incredible price, to which Eldia explains that people have been treating Juin blades like priceless works of art recently, causing their overall value to skyrocket across the land. She continues his explanation of the weapon's value, noting that this specific sword was forged from rare magical ore, which essentially makes it a one-of-a-kind treasure. Eldia adds that if such a blade were presented to the right collectors, they would gladly spend an amount of money equal to the massive fortune she won at the casino earlier that day, prompting Albert to acknowledge that the situation finally makes perfect sense. This deep knowledge of her personal business causes Chikusa to narrow her eyes in suspicion, as she demands to know exactly how much the princess knows about her and wonders if their paths have somehow crossed in the past. The princess is instantly sent into a state of swirly-eyed panic as she realizes her mistake, frantically reminding herself that while she knows everything about the warrior, they have never actually met. She curses her own excitement for being around one of her favorite characters and worries that everything will be ruined if she loses the samurai's trust now, so she quickly tries to salvage the moment by firmly stating that they have never met before today. Albert steps in with a calm and reassuring smile, explaining that his mistress, Lady Elua, only knows about the samurai because of things she witnessed within a powerful vision. Chikusa reacts with pure shock, asking if the princess is actually a seer. Albert notes that while his mistress does have visions, her sight is quite limited, and the warrior should not expect too much from her gift. Eldia is internally cheering for her butler, praising his brilliant save while reflecting on how they have established a cover story where her game knowledge is explained as seeing different possibilities for the future. She is immensely relieved that seeing the future is a known phenomenon in the world of emotion fantasy. Chikusa looks on with a bewildered expression, feeling as though the princess sees far more than just a simple performance when she gazes at her. Albert casually explains that Eldia has become a dedicated fan and warns that she has these eccentric episodes quite often, suggesting the samurai will eventually get used to the behavior. The warrior decides that if the princess has truly witnessed that much of her life through visions, she has no choice but to accept the situation. She tentatively asks if she may address her rescuer as Lady Elua, a request that sends the princess into a state of tearful joy. Chikusa looks down with a sense of resignation, beginning to conclude that her treasured blade is likely lost to her forever. Sensing the warrior's sadness, Eldia quickly interrupts with a loud declaration that everything is going to be perfectly fine. Driven by a sudden burst of determination, Eldia insists that the warrior absolutely must have her sacred sword at her side once again, and she promises to personally recover that vital part of Chikusa's soul, while urging her new favorite character never to lose hope. Albert watches the exchange, wondering aloud how the samurai manages to deliver such incredibly charming and alluring lines without even realizing the effect she is having on those around her. Chikusa hesitates as she looks away, admitting that although she truly appreciates the generous offer, she simply cannot bring herself to trust the princess yet. Eldia acknowledges the warrior's suspicion, understanding that the ruthless way she conducted herself back in the arena has left a negative impression, and she reflects on how her chosen role as an antagonist occasionally makes making friends a bit difficult. Clenching her fist, Chikusa asks for the opportunity to work off the debt incurred on her behalf, swearing that even without the legendary blade she treasures, she will dedicate her skills to fighting for the princess as long as they are together, a sincere vow that leaves Eldia looking completely breathless. Eldia is overcome with emotion as she wipes away a tear and tells the warrior that she is truly grateful for her words, while she secretly thinks to herself that the samurai is simply far too precious. Albert looks down at her and points out that she accidentally said her embarrassing internal thoughts out loud, leaving Chikusa sitting there in a state of absolute confusion. The heavy silence of the room is interrupted by the arrival of a new face. The maid lets out a sudden exclamation about how striking the warrior's outfit is, causing Chikusa to jump and blush furiously as she tries to hide her revealing costume. Taking pity on the embarrassed samurai, the cat girl maid notes that it must be incredibly difficult for a proud warrior to be seen in such a way and promises to find her some proper clothes later. Chikusa is visibly relieved by the offer and admits she never expected to meet another member of the Juin race in this land, asking if the maid is actually a feline, to which the girl offers a bright confirmation while her long tail waves happily in the air. The cheerful maid, Sora, beams as she explains that Lady Elua was the one who bought her, noting that her super-rare blue eyes were the primary reason she was originally sold off into service. Sora continues by mentioning that many nobles seek out beast folk to use as mere decorations or pets, recalling how her first master was truly the worst. She expresses deep gratitude for her current life under Lady Elua's care, which she finds remarkably easy and pleasant, until Albert intervenes and firmly commands her to stop the idle chatter and return to her duties. Sora quickly acknowledges the order and enthusiastically tells the warrior to follow her. Eldia collapses onto the plush sofa with a heavy thud, lamenting to herself that the warrior's sudden sincerity was far too much to handle and felt like a total form of cheating. Albert remains perfectly composed as he settles onto the seat nearby, calmly requesting that his mistress take off her makeup before she begins one of her rants. The princess lets out a frustrated sound as she finds herself staring into her butler's striking and intense gaze. Eldia frantically insists that she is perfectly capable of cleaning her own face. Albert holds his mistress's chin with a steady hand, gently instructing her to stay still as he explains that he simply cannot complete his work if she keeps moving. The princess experiences a moment of distress, silently begging him not to murmur, so close to her because she feels she has already reached her limit for intense emotional moments today. Albert studies her expression and notes that she appears perfectly normal to him, leading Eldia to offer a nervous wink while wondering exactly what he could be implying. Albert asks for clarification on the specific role Chikusa Tagetsu plays in her life, explaining that he needs to understand her feelings so he can decide how to properly handle the new guest. Eldia admits that the warrior was one of the very first characters she ever recruited into her adventuring party. She recalls how the samurai's combat skills and straightforward playstyle were incredibly accessible for a beginner, noting that she ended up relying on the warrior just as much as she did on Albert himself and simply found herself captivated by her over time. Eldia points out that the warrior's first appearance in the original timeline shouldn't happen for quite some time, and notes that she is supposed to have her legendary sword with her, prompting Albert to observe that the samurai truly isn't supposed to be here at all. Albert seeks clarification on whether the woman is meant to be a part of the grander story, and Eldia confirms a suspicion while adding that her presence in this location suggests that something has gone fundamentally wrong. Reflecting on her 10 years in this world, the princess realizes that while some events are destined to happen regardless of her actions, others require her to actively intervene to make them a reality, noting how difficult it is to tell which category each specific plot point falls into. Considering the samurai's prideful nature, Albert states his belief that something is definitely starting to go awry, causing Eldia to let out a little laugh as she remarks on how blunt her butler is being even by his own sharp standards. The princess declares that their primary goal for now is to recover the stolen sword and asks Albert to secure an appointment with the Ordi family so she can uncover more about the casino's secrets. Albert agrees that they must work carefully behind the scenes if the blade is truly that valuable and promises to personally investigate the local distribution networks. Eldia offers a bright and sincere word of thanks to her butler. The princess looks up and asks if he is already finished with her skincare, prompting Albert to observe that he is constantly amazed by how passionate she becomes whenever one of her favorite characters is involved. With a sudden burst of energy, Eldia proudly declares that everything she does is for the ultimate happiness of her favorites, insisting that these are the people she truly cares for. Albert notes that it has been a long time since she has shown such an intense reaction, pointing out that she hasn't behaved this way since the moment she first encountered the legendary hero and the holy priestess. Eldia finds herself confused by her butler's sudden change in demeanor, internally noting that he is acting rather strange and wondering if he might be feeling displeased, lonely, or perhaps even a little bit sulky. Eldia leans into her butler and softly asks if he is feeling tired, noting that he really seemed to let loose with his display of power in the arena earlier that day. Albert makes a sudden, startling request for his mistress to touch him, leaving the princess staring at him. The princess is left in a state of total bewilderment. She frantically wonders if she is truly expected to touch a man so incredibly handsome that he is practically a living work of art. Eldia crosses her arms in a firm rejection, declaring that while adoring him from a distance is perfectly fine, physical touching is strictly forbidden. Eldia declares that favorite characters are meant for appreciating, idolizing, and cherishing, but one should never actually cross the line and try to touch them. Albert notes that while she often says some rather astonishing things, he has realized that she never actually makes physical contact with anyone, including himself. Eldia thinks that while technology like virtual reality exists, it is still limited to the world inside the game, and she honestly believes that her distant behavior stems from the reality that all her favorites were originally stuck behind a digital screen. She understands that while she enjoys cheering her favorites on, the overzealous behavior of fans can sometimes spoil how others perceive the characters they love, and she realizes that since there are so many other passionate fans out there, these characters will never actually be hers alone. The princess acknowledges that even though it might sound like an exaggeration, The way she conducts herself can reflect poorly on her favorite characters, so she believes everyone should be free to fantasize as they wish, as long as those thoughts remain private and they respect the proper time, place, and occasion. Eldia notes that while fans might have wild thoughts in their heads, they should never actually act on those feelings in the real world. The princess shouts her most sacred command, insisting that the ultimate and absolute law of any true fan is that one simply does not ever lay a finger on their favorites. Albert leans in, testing her resolve by asking if her strict rules would still apply even when the very person she adores is the one giving her his full permission to finally cross that line. He reaches out to firmly take her hand in his. Albert notes that her entire theory is based on the assumption that these characters are merely public property meant to be shared by every fan. He draws her even closer and explains that even if she views him as nothing more than a favorite character from a game, she is the only person who truly matters to him right now, leaving the princess completely dazed and breathless. Albert continues by telling the princess that she officially has his permission to touch him. He makes it clear that she is free to do whatever she likes. The sudden forwardness of her butler sends Eldia into a total state of panic. Albert leans in, reminding his mistress that because he is her devoted servant, she has always held the absolute right to order him to do anything her heart desires. Eldia finds herself in confusion, reflecting on how she has spent so long adoring him as her favorite character that even though she knows his feelings are real, she honestly has no idea how to handle the situation. Albert leans over the princess, asking her to simply admit that she has finally fallen for him. Eldia lets out a faint sound of distress as she finds herself completely pinned under his steady gaze. She experiences a sudden jolt of confusion, reflecting on how unusual this behavior is for her butler since he normally relies on his dry sense of humor to make sharp comments and leave her hanging. The princess stammers his name and admits she is probably just overthinking the situation, leading Albert to calmly ask what she is trying to say. She takes a wild guess and asks if his strange behavior is actually a result of him being jealous of the way she was just squealing over the legendary samurai warrior. Albert admits that she is apparently not as oblivious to his true feelings as he had initially expected. Albert turns his head with a smug little huff, while Eldia reflects on the fact that she is not so far gone that she would fail to notice the feelings of a man who has made his deep affections for her absolutely crystal clear. Albert looks away, admitting that while he fully understands the kind of fangirl she is at heart, that does not mean he can ever bring himself to just accept being treated like a fictional character. Eldia's eyes go wide as she notices a faint flush on her servant's face, realizing that her cool and composed butler is actually blushing from intense embarrassment. The princess is left in a state of total bewilderment, her mind fixated on the reality that Albert, a man who is famously as cool as a cucumber, is currently feeling completely flustered right in front of her. Albert leans in with a confident smile that shows off his sharp fangs, asking the princess exactly what her response is to his sudden and honest declaration of love. Completely overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, Eldia lets out a frantic shout and collapses face down onto the sofa, her uncontrollable emotions causing a surge of dark energy to erupt through the room while her butler watches. Sitting at a table covered in a delicious morning meal, the rabbit samurai Chikusa looks down at her breakfast and admits she never thought her host would go so far as to bring her personal belongings to the estate. The warrior bows her head and states that she is now deeply in the lady's debt, while the princess offers a bright smile and tells her she is very welcome. Nearby, the catgirl Sora stands with a teapot and a happy expression, explaining that while she does not exactly know the secret to making traditional hakama pants, she did her best to sew together a similar outfit for their guest. The cheerful maid feels proud of her work and promises that she will have even more clothes ready in the correct size before the sun goes down. The princess reaches out to give Sora some head pats as a way of saying thanks for all the hard work. Sora leans into the touch with a blush and a happily waving tail, muttering that the lady's affection can sometimes be a bit much for a simple maid to handle. Chikusa repeats how truly grateful she is for everything they've done to make her feel at home. Eldia feels she is basically obligated to swipe her credit card whenever it comes to supporting her absolute favorite characters. The princess feels a sudden wave of panic as she covers her mouth, realizing that she has let her guard down far too much just because she is in the safety of her own home. Trying to regain her composure, the lady turns to the samurai and explains that she is planning to go out this afternoon, asking if Chikusa would be willing to accompany her. The warrior offers a simple statement of agreement. Chikusa admits she will need to borrow a sword since her own sacred blade is still missing. The princess tells her new friend that she has everything under control. Leading the way into a private room, the lady gestures toward a table covered in a collection of high-quality katanas. She notes that while none of these weapons can truly compare to the legendary Hagazuki, the warrior should feel free to test each one out and choose whichever blade happens to catch her eye. The sight of the collection sends Chikusa into a state of total shock, and she frantically demands for everyone to wait a moment while she processes the incredible value of the items. She points to a straight-edged blade, identifying it as a rare Mitsuhaya, before spotting another sword with a unique temper that she recognizes as a priceless Hanagumo, concluding that this pile of weapons must have cost a massive fortune. As the samurai begins to wonder aloud if such a rare collection could have possibly been stolen, Albert says that theft is quite a rude observation coming from a guest in their home. Chikusa offers a quick apology for her earlier suspicion and shrinks back in embarrassment. Eldia clarifies that while the swords were originally stolen, she bought them all with the plan to put them back on the market for deserving warriors. Chikusa is stunned by this and asks why she would go to such lengths. Eldia reflects on the fact that these are all rare items from her favorite game that were destined for the black market. She grabbed them so she could eventually offer one to the hero Licht, though she knows she can never explain the real reason to the samurai. Eldia simply tells her guests that she did it because she wanted to and enjoys seeing fine weapons used by those with the talent to wield them. Eldia points out that the blades are well-maintained and encourages Chikusa to use them as needed, since they will never replace her true favorite sword anyway. Chikusa touches her waist and confesses that she has felt quite nervous without the familiar weight of a weapon at her side. Chikusa mentions how thrilling it will be to use a high-quality blade once again. Eldia tells the warrior that she is welcome to take every single sword on the table. Albert tells his mistress that simply will not do it, while Chikusa argues that one sword is enough. Eldia sniffles at the thought of not being able to give more. Eldia thinks about spending a massive amount of money as a way to thank the warrior for being so precious. Chikusa asks where they are traveling as they walk through the town. Eldia says she is happy to tell her. Eldia stands before a large building and explains they are going to meet a crime lord she knows. The sound of heels clicking against the carpet fills the room as someone walks inside. An elf with long white hair and jewelry on her ears looks up with a smile that shows a sharp tooth. The woman sits in her dark dress, while her eyes watch the newcomer with a steady gaze. The elf woman laughs and mentions that Elua has been keeping herself very busy lately. Elua says it has been a long time and asks Kortovia how her business is doing. Kortovia states that things are going as they usually do and invites her guests to sit down. Kortovia Ordi is the leader of the Ordi family, which is a criminal group in the town. In the game world, her people are known as pseudo-elves because they have the ears of an elf, but the habits of a human. Within this world, Kortovia is a powerful leader who manages the dark side of the town. She sits on her chair with many guards in suits standing behind her. Looking at the guest, Kortovia says that Elua does not usually bring new people to their meetings. Chikusa stands nearby with her eyes closed. Elua introduces the warrior as Chikusa Tagetsu and explains that the girl will be staying at her home for a while. She says that Chikusa is very special to her, and she wanted to make the introduction personally. Kortovia waves her long nails and states that she understands the situation. She says she will pass this information along to the rest of her family members. Standing up from her seat, Kortovia asks if the princess has managed to find herself another new favorite person to adore. Kortovia returns to her seat across from the princess. Kortovia rests her chin on her hand and tells Elua she is welcome to visit whenever she feels lonely. Elua covers her face and thinks that Kortovia knows she is beautiful and is acting cool on purpose. Chikusa asks if she is the one being called a favorite as Cortovia mentions hearing rumors about the dramatic way the warrior was purchased. Cortovia leans in to touch Elua and calls her a tease while promising she will always be waiting for her. Albert pulls Elua away and tells Madame Cortovia to stop pressuring his lady. Eldia enters a state of total fangirl shock, clutching her hands and thinking that she almost saw a higher state of being from the intense experience. Albert stands behind his mistress and warns her not to let down her guard because the elf woman is clearly toying with her. Cortovia lets out a loud laugh, noting how the princess always has a splendid reaction to her teasing. Eldia reflects on how terrifying it is when women are aware of their own beauty. She feels overwhelmed by the amount of attention she receives, especially since she shared the truth about her situation with the crime lord. Cortovia laughs at the butler and calls him an indelicate guard dog. She jokes that it is not as if he would ever actually go after his own master, causing Eldia to look up with a start. Cortovia suddenly goes quiet and looks at the pair with a shocked expression. She tells them to wait as she realizes something important. Cortovia shouts that Albert has actually managed to seduce the princess, while Eldia is shocked that the crime lord somehow noticed it. Cortovia stares in disbelief as she processes the realization. Eldia thinks this is mean and states she is not completely oblivious to such things. Cortovia points out that Eldia usually collects many fine people and loves them all equally as an altruist, so it is shocking that she finally chose just one. Eldia demands to know exactly when this seduction was supposed to have happened. Cortovia sighs and tells the princess that her lack of awareness is nothing short of criminal. Cortovia laughs and says she feels for the warrior as well because the lady will never let her escape now that she has been found. While Chikusa asks if it is being suggested that she should become the princess's lover. Chikusa states that she tries not to hold any prejudice against romantic activities and will not complain if that is what the princess wants. However, she admits she is not as clever as Cortovia or Albert and asks that the princess refrain from such things. This leaves Eldia wondering what the warrior is talking about. Cortovia asks if the samurai's ears are only for decoration and explains that the way the princess behaves is like a young girl getting excited over an actor. She notes that while the lady's love can be excessive and sometimes goes too far, she never expects anything in return. Chikusa wonders if what the crime lord said is true, while the princess frantically nods her head in agreement. Eldia reflects on her own motto, which says that while adoring someone is fine, touching them is not allowed. Cortovia observes that the princess's love is strong enough to save an entire race, but being hit with such deep affection can be its own kind of monster. She warns the samurai to try and not drown in the lady's love. The princess tells Cortovia to wait and asks what her comment is supposed to mean. Albert states his belief that he was able to bring out those special qualities in the princess. He adds that his true attempt to win her heart has not even started yet. Cortovia says she is eager to see the moment the princess finally gives in to her feelings. She mentions being in awe of the courage and hard work Albert has shown. Eldia states that everyone is making a huge assumption about her falling for someone and says the entire situation is far too much for her to handle. Cortovia explains that the princess seems unfamiliar with having her feelings returned by those she cares for. She suggests that once someone is truly drawn to another person, their original ideals begin to feel like a lie. Eldia reflects on her past life and thinks about how the characters she loved were never able to step out of a digital screen until now. Chikusa clenches her weapon and remarks that she is still working to understand the whole truth, but finds the current information to be helpful. Cortovia invites the group to visit again whenever they need to talk and states that any of the lady's favorites are always welcome in her home. Elua tells Cortovia that she cannot be tricked. Cortovia notes that she has not actually tried to trick her guest yet. Elua mentions the original agreement they made when she first brought the family to this town. She allowed them to follow their business interests to protect their people as long as they kept order in the underworld. Cortovia confirms that the agreement is correct. She notes that her family promised to keep a friendly relationship and help bring wealth to the area. Elua asks why a crude casino is being allowed to operate. She thinks about the trouble she caused there the day before and wants to know why the family has not stepped in. Kortovia apologizes for letting the casino stay open but says the family has not been lazy about the situation. Eldia states that she is listening to the rest of the story. Kortovia says the casino belongs to a new person in town who started fixing games and taking bets on fights. She notes that the place is also dealing in stolen goods from the black market. Kortovia notes that some upper-class people have disappeared after losing everything to the fixed games at that casino. She explains that the establishment forced her best agents out during their investigation and adds that the situation is ruining her own family's business reputation. Eldia thinks about how the main strength of elves is their powerful magic instead of physical size. She believes that just a few skilled elves should be strong enough to take down an entire organization by themselves. Albert asks why the situation was allowed to get this bad. He says this behavior is not like Kortovia and wants to know why she does not just kill them all to finish the job. Kortovia holds up her hand and states that she has already tried to fix the problem 3 times. Kortovia explains that the first try was a warning and the second was a threat. She says that the third attempt was meant to be a total purge of the casino. Kortovia admits that none of the family members she sent for those missions ever returned. Kortovia notes that no bodies were sent back as threats, and they have found no signs that the agents were sold off. She mentions that the people simply disappeared and admits the situation is unsettling. Turning her attention to Chikusa, Kortovia suggests that the rabbit friend is a valuable source of information because she has seen the inside of the operation. Chikusa states that she fails to see the difference between the crime lord and the people at the arena. She points out that Kortovia is well aware that her own actions go against the rules of society and wonders how it is possible for her to call the arena creepy. Eldia thinks to herself that Chikusa has a valid point even though she is calling out Kortovia. She tells the warrior that there is a significant difference between the two groups. Eldia explains that the Ordi family maintains order over the local criminals. She says that they understand the underworld only survives because the rest of society exists and would never do anything to disrupt regular life. Chikusa listens to the explanation and states that she understands the distinction. Kortovia points out that the group running the new casino is nothing like her own family. The crime lord explains that these people act like they do not care if they take the entire town down with them. She says she has a duty to protect her family even if it means doing dirty work. Kortovia states they cannot afford to lose the town where they are able to live easily. Chikusa takes a deep breath and looks over at the princess. Eldia gives her a small nod to encourage her to share what she knows. The warrior admits she does not have much to tell them because she spent all her time at the arena fighting her matches. Chikusa mentions hearing rumors that the fighters who won many games were taken to another location. She notes that the other combatants called this outcome kindness. Kortovia repeats the word kindness as she thinks about what it might really mean for the missing fighters. Chikusa remembers seeing many wealthy people watching the fights and mentions that she noticed an unusual power. Eldia focuses on the mention of an unusual power. Chikusa explains that she felt the very strong and scary power of a warrior. Chikusa notes that this energy felt very similar to the power she senses from Kortovia and Albert. Chikusa admits that she has no more information while Eldia realizes this person is likely another character from her game. Eldia thinks about how many possible characters there are and worries that she cannot identify them yet. Kortovia states that the family has learned that local nobles are helping the person who runs the casino. She explains that Count Deborus is involved and they are planning a large event to bring in wealthy people from out of town. Eldia looks at the group and realizes that the next step is very clear. The princess smiles and says she will simply have to sneak into the upcoming event. Chikusa looks surprised by the plan while Albert and Kortovia watch the lady. Kortovia tells Eldia that she understands the situation quickly because she is an important figure in the town. The crime lord explains that having the princess on their side would give the casino owners control over the local power structure. Eldia says she is thankful for the compliment, but points out that she is still just a young child. Kortovia looks confused and reminds the princess that she made a scene at the casino specifically to stop people from treating her like a child. Kortovia states that the lady has shown she is a rich person with a deep knowledge of evil. She believes this will lead to special treatment and a chance to join the private group at the casino. Eldia explains internally that her past behavior was a lucky mistake caused by her anger at seeing a favorite character in trouble. Cortovia addresses the butler by name. Cortovia tells Albert to stop looking at her with a deadly expression. Albert says he expects to be the one to handle the mission and tells the crime lord not to use the lady as bait. Cortovia describes the butler as a scary guard dog but states that she still wants to ask the lady for help. Cortovia says she has not made any progress in her search through normal or illegal means. She notes that the princess has a network that is better than any other and says she wishes she could have both of them for herself. Albert says he must refuse because he is the servant of Lady Elua. Eldia tells Albert that she has heard enough. She explains that she wants the town to stay peaceful so she can enjoy her time and states she will help Cortovia. Albert observes that the matter is settled since the lady has made her choice. Eldia mentions that the casino people cannot ignore her since she visited the arena. She wonders if they will try to find out where she stands. Albert says that if he starts first, he will go after the casino owner or Count Debris. He states that he will finish the job before the lady has to get involved. Eldia states that she is the one who suggested the idea and asks the group to inform her if she needs to make a public appearance. Albert asks if the lady has forgotten her official job duties and notes that she will be responsible for all that work while he is gone. Eldia looks away and whistles to ignore his comment. Albert turns toward Cortovia and asks if there is an available way to enter the casino. Cortovia explains that the casino loses staff members often and is always searching for new workers. She mentions that the best dealers are even invited to visit the estate of Count Debris. Albert decides to infiltrate the casino by applying for a position under a fake name. He plans to find leads by questioning those with access to the records and believes this is a safe method to learn about the upcoming event. Eldia covers her mouth and observes that her butler is very smart. Cortovia laughs and blushes as she watches the interaction. Cortovia watches her friend and notes that the lady is always behaving in this manner. The crime lord explains her belief that Count Debris is not the actual mastermind behind the current situation. Elua acknowledges that Cortovia has very good instincts regarding the true power at work. Cortovia says that her own intuition is nothing compared to the powerful sight the princess possesses. The lady winks and states that she has not actually seen any visions concerning this matter. Cortovia notes that even without the help of a vision, the princess will still cause a massive scene at that casino. Elua explains that she will not hold back now that the enemies have targeted Cortovia. She thinks to herself that she must push the princess to reveal any sign of weakness. Eldia realizes that the crime lord deeply cares for her people and knows that the 3 agents who were sent on the mission never returned. Eldia believes that Cortovia is secretly blaming herself for what happened to her family members. Eldia reflects on how her time in this world has taught her things that were never part of the original game knowledge. Eldia states that it is only natural to feel sad after losing the people who are close to her. Cortovia watches the princess and observes that she is very soft. Elua shrugs and says she is only soft toward her favorite people. She notes that since the crime lord will get much help from her and Albert, they will require a large payment. Cortovia mentions that this behavior is why people call her the vile princess. Elua smiles and states that she is simply being true to her own desires. Cortovia acknowledges the statement and says she understands how it is. Sora outlines the mission to identify the casino mastermind and reclaim the stolen katana. She concludes that the goal is simply to defeat the person in charge. Elua agrees with the summary but stresses that the priority is the sword. She explains that because the enemy is powerful, she and Albert will take points. Albert suggests that the lady should remain behind and focus on giving orders. Sora directs the staff to split up their duties. She clarifies that while Albert infiltrates the target, the rest will support him by gathering intelligence from other sources. Elua tells the team to find out who Count Debris is trading with and to find a copy of the guest list. Sora promises to dig up every detail from the Count's dinner choices to his private pillow talk. Chikusa realizes that every servant in the household has gone through special training. Sora confirms that the samurai's observation is correct. Sora explains that while they all have different specialties, Every servant studied their trade under Albert and Lady Elua. She adds that she is personally skilled at sewing, infiltrating, and eavesdropping. Chikusa reacts with total shock to the idea that eavesdropping and infiltration are considered legitimate trades. Sora laughs and notes that survival is a requirement because the lady of the house would be inconsolable if any of them were to die. Elua defensively shouts that such feelings are natural and claims the authority to guarantee the happiness of her staff. Chikusa looks on with a steady gaze and concludes that Elua is a rare and valuable leader to everyone present. Sora chuckles at the samurai's stiff behavior and tells her to drop the formality and move with the current of the home. Elua hides her face in her hands and mumbles about how every person she cares for is far too precious for her to handle. Sora asks Elua about her personal safety plans while Albert is gone. Elua explains that she intends to rely on Chikusa for security and notes they can excuse the butler's absence by telling others that the samurai is her new favorite. Albert looks toward the lady and asks her to bring at least one more guard along for the trip. Elua states that all hands are needed to ensure the operation goes smoothly. She adds that she is certain she will be in good hands with Chikusa. Elua notes that the warrior would never break a vow made on her blade. She explains that Chikusa does not swear any oath lightly. Chikusa looks down with a serious gaze while Elua watches her with a happy smile. Chikusa places her hand firmly on the hilt of her katana with a rhythmic clatter. Chikusa promises to serve the lady with her blade and her best skills. She emphasizes that she always keeps her word. Sora observes that since the mistress chose the warrior and the butler approves, the rest of the staff has no reason to object. The household staff begins placing bets on how long it will take the lady to notice their presence. They also start wagering on the effectiveness of the butler's upcoming disguise. The staff decides to sort everything out later, while Albert jokes about how much the team seems to want more of his special training. Chikusa calls out to the lady as the group finishes their meeting. The samurai asks for the lady's true identity. Elua stops and looks back at her new guard. Chikusa acknowledges that she has agreed to serve as a personal guard but notes that she has only been in the household for a single day. She concludes that she should not have been included in the strategy meetings that took place throughout the day. She asks why the lady has chosen to be so open about her personal affairs. Chikusa states her awareness of the lady's reputation for doing evil deeds. She observes that it would be more sensible to hide such secrets to ensure a warrior remains on her side. Elua acknowledges to herself that the samurai is correct. She realizes that she is indeed very open about everything she does. Elua tells herself that she has specific reasons for her behavior as she begins her response to the warrior. Elua reminds the samurai that the warrior previously stated a desire to see the truth for herself. Elua gazes at her new guard and thinks about how pretty the warrior is. She reflects on how much she truly loves her favorite character. Elua explains that she has done enough to earn the title of the Vile Princess. She states that her actions were necessary, and she does not feel sorry for them. Elua continues by saying that she has no desire to hide anything from Chikusa. Chikusa listens as Elua reflects on how she will never keep secrets from her noble and unwavering samurai. Elua promises to remain open unless a topic is too difficult to explain. She tells Chikusa to judge her and even cut her down if she is ever found to be unforgivable. Elua asks the warrior to remain by her side until they recover the sword Hagazuki, while Chikusa insists that she is not ungrateful and would never act in such a way. Elua mentions the possibility of being a villain and expresses her desire to see Chikusa use her full speed and skills in a real fight. Chikusa notes that turning her blade against the lady would result in Albert and the other servants taking her down. Elua waves her hands and claims she would not go so far as to suggest her servants would easily defeat the samurai. Later, Albert successfully enters the casino as a staff member and makes steady progress on his investigation. Elua realizes there is no reason to worry about his safety. She then receives a formal invitation from the same casino asking for a visit. She decides it is time to return to the crooked establishment. Elua sits with Chikusa and tells the manager that her dear bunny came to her in tears. She asks the man if he knows the current location of the warrior's beloved blade. The manager denies having any knowledge of the weapon. Eldia points out that the samurai reported the sword was taken at this specific establishment. Eldia reflects on how she warned Chikusa not to be surprised by anything she might do during the visit. She looks at the samurai and thinks about how adorable the girl is with such a red face. While the manager stammers that the item is no longer on the premises, Eldia asks if the sword has been sold to someone else. The manager offers a frantic apology and states that selling such items is part of their job. Eldia asks the manager if he knows the identity of the buyer who purchased the katana. The manager trembles as he reveals that the item is scheduled to be auctioned off at an upcoming party. Eldia realizes that while she expected an auction, the specific event sounds familiar to her. The party is described as a masquerade hosted by Count Debris, where a secret auction will be held for guests with private invitations. Eldia connects the details of a masquerade and a secret auction to the current situation involving Cortovia. Eldia grins and tells the manager she understands the situation. She then asks if it is possible for her to receive an invitation to the event. The manager frantically confirms that he already intended to invite Miss Howard to the party. He looks extremely nervous while making the promise. Eldia offers a polite thank you and states that she can hardly wait for the event. Internally, she notes that she recognizes this specific story beat from her memories. A hand reaches out to ring a small service bell. The manager invites the lady to enjoy herself with any dealer she prefers. He adds that the room is soundproofed to ensure her total privacy. Eldia understands that the man is trying to win her favor with flattery and gifts. She decides there is no reason to refuse the offer. The lady settles into her seat and prepares to choose a dealer from the lineup. Eldia points to a specific young man in the dealer lineup and chooses him as her companion for the evening. The selected worker flinches, as he is singled out by the wealthy guest. The manager mentions that this particular worker is still new and inexperienced. He checks to see if the lady is sure she wants him while the young man fidgets nervously. Eldia smiles and explains that she likes the boy's innocence and insists that he is the one she wants. The manager bows and agrees to her request. He tells the pair to take their time while the area outside is confirmed to be empty. The manager walks out and closes the soundproof doors. The dealer asks the lady if she wants to play a game or if he should fix her a drink. Eldia decides that having a drink would be a lovely choice. The young man turns his back to the lady to start making the drink. Eldia watches him closely as she waits. Eldia collapses onto the table in a sudden outburst over the young man's backless vest. Chikusa watches the display with visible confusion. Eldia covers her mouth and reflects on the fact that she has been waiting for this moment. She concludes that the casino possesses excellent taste in staff uniforms. Eldia drops to the floor and continues her internal praise of the clothing design. She reflects on how the halter neck and exposed sides emphasize the wearer's physique. Chikusa finds the situation scandalous and pleads for the behavior to stop. Chikusa tells the lady to calm down immediately. Eldia offers a muffled apology from the floor and admits that she simply lost control of her emotions. The young dealer looks back with concern and asks if the guest is unwell. Chikusa suddenly rises and moves toward him while preparing her blade. Chikusa commands the young man to stay where he is. She observes that he is standing in a strange manner and identifies a weapon hidden on his body. The worker flinches as he is discovered. Chikusa observes that no casino staff member should carry such equipment. She demands to know the young man's intentions toward the lady. The worker begins to fidget under her intense gaze. Chikusa warns him not to move and states she will attack if he takes another step. She begins to draw her blade while the young man takes a step forward. Eldia watches the confrontation and feels conflicted. She realizes Chikusa's protection is being wasted on her, but finds the samurai's vigilance to be incredibly impressive. The young dealer looks distressed. Eldia focuses her attention on him and concludes that he is the most amazing person in the room. Eldia fixates on the young man's rolled-up sleeves. She thinks about how the sight of his muscles is overwhelming. Eldia buries her face in her hands and screams that the situation is too much to handle. She identifies the disguised young man as her butler, Albert. Chikusa stands there with a confused expression as she wonders what is happening. Eldia continues to hide her face. Elua reflects on how the act of playing an innocent dealer who is untouched by the world is a perfect performance. Albert admits that he believed the disguise might actually be effective, but concludes that he has failed to hide his identity once again. Chikusa recognizes the sound of his voice and asks if the person standing before her is actually Master Albert. Albert moves his hand toward his face. Albert slides his hand across his forehead and reveals his true features to everyone in the room. Elua watches with a steady gaze before she suddenly drops to the floor to begin a series of dramatic bows. Face down on the ground, Elua states she is ready to be buried right where she lies. Albert stands over his mistress and refuses her request, telling her to stand up instead. Elua cries as she reminds Albert of her warning about showing off his body. She views the sight of her favorite character in a backless vest as a personal assault. Albert asks what is required to bring her back to life. Elua responds that she wants to stuff cash into the back of his uniform. Albert admits his mistress's thoughts are scary, but he eventually gives in. He notes that the act will help his cover and tells her to keep the money at a reasonable amount. Elua reacts with a sudden burst of energy and asks if the butler is actually serious about letting her go through with her plan. Chikusa notes that while the voice was slightly odd, every other detail from the aura to the gate felt completely different. Albert explains that such deception is an essential skill for an assassin. He adds that he did not expect the lady to recognize him by his voice alone. Chikusa is surprised by the reveal of the butler's profession as an assassin. Elua notes that he seems like an entirely different person. Albert confirms the success of his disguise and concludes that the deception is perfect since a trained warrior failed to see through it. He notes that despite these changes, the lady is still able to recognize him. Elua explains internally that his vampire transformation allows him to control his voice and his center of gravity. Albert points out that the technique requires more blood to maintain, but remains an effective skill. He mentions his frustration at being recognized every time. Chikusa remembers the servants betting on the success of the disguise. Albert confirms that the servants enjoy betting on how many seconds it will take for the lady to see through his disguise. He states that he has accepted the behavior and now considers it a form of training. Elua explains that the game lasts until she either calls him by his name or loses her composure from excitement. Elua reflects on how Albert's performance as a serious and innocent dealer caught her off guard. She admits she had no choice but to lose her composure when faced with this new side of him. Elua stops and looks down with a look of sudden confusion as she realizes something. Elua asks Albert why he is carrying a knife this time. She notes that he usually avoids carrying anything to ensure he stays fully in character during a disguise. Albert explains that he brought a weapon because he was also testing Chikusa's awareness. He states that he is pleased his mistress managed to notice the hidden item. Chikusa notes that a warrior naturally remains wary of any strange person encountered in a location where no enemies are expected. Chikusa states that she had no idea the dealer was actually Albert. Elua praises Chikusa for her sharp observation and admits that while she recognized Albert, she did not notice the knife. Albert asks Elua how she managed to recognize him despite the complete transformation of his voice, face, and mannerisms. He admits his confusion regarding her ability to see through his disguise the instant their eyes meet. Elua declares that regardless of his physical appearance, he remains the person who excites her the most. Chikusa stands in silence while observing the interaction between the lady and the butler. Chikusa reacts with a deep blush and asks if the two of them are currently in a relationship. Albert explains that he has already made his feelings clear to his mistress. He observes that she is often occupied with other interests and concludes that their status is currently on hold. Albert addresses his mistress as Lady Elua. She reacts with a sharp gulp and hides her face as the room goes quiet. Eldia struggles to find her words. She acknowledges that her devotion to him has remained unchanged for over a decade and recognizes that his actions on the night of their escape left no doubt about his true intentions. The heavy tension becomes unbearable for Chikusa, causing the samurai to blurt out a frantic apology as she desperately tries to steer the conversation back to their objective. Eldia welcomes the change of pace and immediately directs Albert to provide an update on his findings because they must make the most of their remaining time. Albert notes that his successful performance as a dealer has earned him a position as a staff member for the upcoming secret auction at the Debris estate. Eldia praises his efficiency and announces that she has also managed to obtain her own formal invitation to the masquerade. Eldia confirms that her staff is already in position. She mentions that the Ordi family has committed to providing full support as soon as the schedule for the auction is finalized. Albert notes that they have sufficient manpower for the mission. He decides to focus his efforts on assisting the group from within the Debris estate. Albert asks if the primary goal for the mission is still the same. Eldia agrees, but points out that this is their only chance to infiltrate, so she wants to eliminate the enemy completely to ensure total success. Eldia announces that she intends to involve Licht and his party to achieve their objective of taking down the opposition. Albert considers the timeline and asks if the heroes group has made enough progress to be in the immediate area. Eldia expresses her absolute certainty in the outcome, stating that no evil force is capable of resisting the combined power of the hero and the saint. Eldia observes that this is a connected story and notes that failing to involve the hero's party would lead to a disaster. She reflects on how the concept of the original game focused on saving the world through emotional bonds. She notes that specific character arcs were designed to tie the cast together, leading some to compare the experience to a dating simulation. Albert asks if the current situation is actually Cortovia's specific story, and Eldia confirms that he has made a correct observation. Eldia remembers the original plot where Cortovia attempted to dismantle a secret auction at a masquerade by forming a strategic bond with the hero. Eldia feels relieved that the event is happening naturally. She previously worried about the difficulty of building a rival crime syndicate from nothing just to force the scenario into existence and pit herself against Cortovia. Eldia declares her readiness to attend the masquerade and anticipates that the event will be a remarkable spectacle, while Chikusa calls her name. Chikusa asks if the connected story is a detail Eldia saw in a vision. Eldia confirms the samurai's assumption and offers an apology. Chikusa identifies the hero and priestess as Sir Licht and Sister Yuria, the figures known from newspapers for their journey to seal the gates to the underworld. Eldia explains that the pair will expose the casino's corruption because they are currently at the center of historical events. She reflects on how she used this strategy many times during her days as the Vile Princess. Eldia notes that every event, including disasters and side stories, results in a positive outcome as long as the heroes follow the established plot. Eldia clarifies that she prefers for the duo to spend their time relaxing and eating delicious food rather than being in danger, but she understands they require many allies to defeat the Dark God. Eldia reflects on how these connected stories are the most effective method for the heroes to build relationships with individuals they would never meet otherwise. Albert expresses concern regarding her desire to contact the heroes again after their previous encounter. Eldia assures him that she has no intention of speaking to them directly, since they are still officially enemies. She admits her true motivation is simply a wish to see her favorite characters in person once more. Albert acknowledges that seeing her favorites is necessary to maintain her spirits and agrees that inviting them to the secret auction is the best course of action. However, he warns her to be cautious because he finds the way the hero and saint behave toward her to be quite strange. Eldia tells him not to worry and decides to utilize her concealment spells. She explains internally that the fundamental rule of any fan is to observe her favorites in action without ever getting in their way. Eldia plans to update Cortovia on the situation and instructs Albert to report back once he obtains the official auction item list. She explains that Cortovia will then identify a victim of theft to facilitate a connection with the heroes. Eldia concludes the auction involves illegal items acquired through deception. She expects Licht and Yuria to intervene and Cortovia's participation to move the story forward. Albert reports the large scale of the event and mentions a mysterious figure called the Leader, who is likely the mastermind. Eldia finds the mention of a leader to be a natural and logical development in the plot. Eldia asks if Albert is staying safe and if his presence has raised any suspicion among the other staff. Albert explains he has not used any physical force and simply relied on his powers of suggestion to gather the information. Eldia notes that she accepts Albert's assurance that he is doing fine. Eldia observes that many people working at the casino are easily influenced and considers the possibility that the staff is being hypnotized on a regular basis to conceal a secret. Eldia ponders the method used to influence such a large group and realizes that frequent hypnosis would inevitably disrupt their memories and daily lives. Eldia considers whether a high-level spellcaster is responsible and wonders if the mastermind might be another character from her favorite game. Albert maintains his cover by asking Lady Elua for her drink order, and she requests a sweet, non-alcoholic beverage. Albert begins to prepare the drink by vigorously shaking the cocktail shaker. Albert continues to mix the drink with a focused and professional demeanor. Eldia watches the movement of the butler's arms as he continues to shake the beverage. The sight of the butler's hands on the shaker leaves Eldia in a state of quiet shock. Albert slides the completed drink over and asks if Chikusa would like the same. Chikusa accepts the proposal. Albert immediately begins preparing the second drink with a professional and focused gaze. Eldia fixates on the exposed skin at the sides of the butler's vest. The intensity of the visual causes Eldia to stagger as she loses her balance. Eldia calls out to Albert while she struggles to stay upright from the shock of his appearance. She asks him directly if he is wearing shirt garters under his dealer uniform. Albert confirms his use of the garters as if it is a completely ordinary part of his wardrobe. Eldia thinks about the function of shirt garters as tools for keeping clothing neat, but decides they are far too suggestive. She is overwhelmed by the fact that Albert wears these items beneath his clothes and treats the topic as a casual matter. Albert adds that he also wears sock garters on a regular basis because they are useful for concealing his blades. Eldia falls backward while shouting for Albert not to overwhelm her with his appearance in such a way. She reflects on the aesthetic of a man wearing garters, comparing the hidden detail to a woman's garter belt and noting the balance between perfect order and the allure of disrupting it. Eldia expresses her total surprise, stating she had no previous knowledge or suspicion that he used such items. She shouts that his perfection is far too much to handle as Albert tells her not to perish from the shock. Albert looms over his mistress and tells her to simply drink the cocktail he made for her. He leans in close to her face and instructs her to go out and have a good time. Eldia takes a deep breath to regain her composure. She realizes that seeing Albert deal cards while dressed in his current outfit will be too much for her to handle. Eldia sits back and asks if he has secured the necessary items. She decides to keep her language vague to ensure Chikusa does not learn the truth. She reflects on the fact that Albert requires frequent recharging because of his heavy magic use. While he normally only needs blood once a month, his current actions mean he must drink it every week or even every day. Albert assures her that the situation is under control because he restocks his supply every time he works. Eldia realizes that the butler is taking blood from the individuals he hypnotizes during his mission. Albert states that he is more concerned about her well-being, leaving Eldia to wonder why he is focused on her. Albert warns Eldia against overexerting herself, noting that she tends to be careless regarding her own needs. Eldia insists she is perfectly capable of continuing for a month as long as she has the visual support of his backless vest and shirt garters. Albert immediately rejects her claim. Albert instructs her to eat properly and ensure her appearance does not deteriorate during their time apart. Eldia proposes that her endurance would increase even further if he allowed her to place cash bills inside his uniform vest. Albert responds to the suggestion with a quiet laugh. Chikusa withdraws in discomfort as the samurai is clearly bothered by the idea of placing money inside the butler's clothing. Eldia understands that the mission depends entirely on the information Albert obtains, requiring his complete focus. She notes that if she stops her current behavior, the butler might change the plan without her permission. Eldia reflects on her observation that Albert is performing well and concludes that the slight disappointment she felt was likely just her imagination. The mission begins with the goal of recovering the legendary sword that was stolen from the samurai Chikusa. The team moves forward by sneaking into a fancy masquerade hosted by Count Debris, who is the owner of the local casino. The main objective for Eldia is to gain access to the secret black market auction and spend whatever is necessary to win back the stolen blade. Eldia positions herself to watch the unfolding drama as the crime lord Cortovia prepares to join forces with the hero and his companions. Acting as a hidden puppet master, Eldia manages the situation, so she and Albert can hunt down the secret leader of the rival faction while the others are distracted. Cortovia smiles with satisfaction as she observes that the heroes have officially taken the bait and entered the trap. Eldia states that everything will go according to her plan now that the heroes are part of the situation. She thanks Cortovia for her assistance. Eldia reflects on how she sent Cortovia to contact the heroes a few days earlier and is glad that everything went well. Cortovia asks Eldia what she plans to do about her identity during the masquerade itself. Eldia notes that the masks will hide her face and explains that Albert ordered her a new dress in a different style, so she remains unrecognizable. Cortovia laughs quietly while thinking about Albert personally choosing the dress and concludes that the butler remains very possessive of his lady. The scene shifts to the vacation home of Count Debris, where guests gather under large chandeliers inside the grand estate. Eldia and Chikusa enter the estate wearing their masquerade costumes and masks. Eldia looks back at Chikusa in the suit she provided and reflects on how the samurai looks like a beauty in men's clothing. Eldia asks if the top hat is hurting Chikusa's long ears. Chikusa admits the hat is a bit tight, but says she is more bothered by the lack of a sword at her side. Chikusa smiles at the concern, which causes Eldia to think that the warrior is absolutely precious. Eldia suddenly sits down in a chair, and Chikusa looks at her to ask what her mistress is doing. Eldia holds up her fan and tells Chikusa to be quiet so they do not draw any attention to themselves. The priestess Yuria stumbles forward while calling for Ricardo to wait for her as Eldia watches the scene and confirms that Cortovia and the heroes are finally in position. Licht adjusts his mask and tells Julia to calm down because her nervous behavior might make the other guests suspicious. Cortovia turns toward her companions and suggests that they will all be better off if they focus on acting natural during the event. The white-haired elf woman moves quietly through the ballroom while keeping her true identity hidden behind an elegant mask. Eldia feels her heart pound with intense excitement. Eldia is completely overwhelmed by the sight of Sister Yuria and thinks about how amazing the saint looks in such a bold and beautiful outfit. Eldia observes Licht and thinks he looks perfect while wearing his military uniform. She then looks at Prince William and decides it is unfair for someone dressed as a jester to be so attractive. The excitement of seeing her favorite characters makes Eldia feel faint while Chikusa catches her and asks if she is feeling okay. Eldia assumes that Sir Anson is busy securing the building exits in case the enemies try to escape later. Eldia watches with wide eyes as Licht reaches out his gloved hand to his companion. Yuria smiles with joy as she places her hand in his to accept the invitation. Eldia watches the hero and priestess dance and finds them far too adorable. Chikusa asks if these people are indeed her mistress's favorites. Eldia identifies them as the master of the sacred sword and the priestess of purification while promising she would do anything for them. Chikusa watches Eldia and observes that she clearly loves the hero and priestess with her entire being. Looking closely at the lady, Chikusa states that she can see only pure affection in Eldia's gaze. Chikusa reflects on how Eldia's previous actions at the casino and her negotiations with the crime boss were very spectacular. The samurai concludes that despite her public reputation, the way Eldia behaves at her private estate is a reflection of her true character. Chikusa decides that Eldia is not truly evil and only acts that way for the sake of the people she likes. The samurai wonders why her mistress does not simply join the heroes in the open. The warrior continues to wonder why Eldia chooses to hide in the shadows and perform actions that damage her own reputation. Eldia realizes that Chikusa is asking out of curiosity rather than judgment and feels a sudden burst of happiness because the samurai wants to understand her. The princess gives a wide grin. Chikusa watches the reaction of her mistress with a focused gaze. Eldia notes that her situation is very complicated but describes herself as a spectator who works behind the scenes. Chikusa realizes that this means the heroes have no idea who the princess actually is. Chikusa asks why the princess would go to such extremes even if the heroes were aware of her presence. Eldia simply states that she does it to save the world. Eldia wonders aloud if her dramatic response sounded cool, while Chikusa looks on without saying a word. Eldia laughs and says she is only joking before explaining that she just wants to do everything she can for the people she loves. Eldia considers her own behavior and concludes that her efforts are not a significant issue. The lady reflects on how she must act this way to ensure the safety and survival of her favorite people. Eldia realizes she is frightened of a world that ignores the original plot and finds it easier to stay in the villain role she was given. She trusts that the heroes will always win if she manages to keep the story moving in the right direction. Eldia tells Chikusa that her devotion includes the samurai as well. Chikusa reacts with surprise to the statement. The samurai stands in silence while processing the lady's kind words. Eldia reflects on how precious Chikusa is and feels relieved that her new guard is accepting her affection. Albert approaches the pair while wearing cat ears and a mask. He asks the lady if she wishes to attend the circus scheduled for that evening. Eldia recognizes the question as the secret passcode they arranged. She thinks to herself that seeing her butler in cat ears is an overwhelming experience. Eldia tells Albert that he made her wait for far too long. Albert notes that he is wearing a special mask and believes it should have made him very easy to locate. Albert asks the lady to keep her voice down because there are other guests nearby. Eldia mentions how much she has been looking forward to the auction and states she would have been devastated to miss it. Albert tells the lady to calm down and explains the event only begins once every masked guest has arrived. He then asks for her official response. The statement is that if the lady is to attend, she would prefer a seat that is special and dark yet bright. Albert acknowledges the answer and invites the guests to follow him through the estate. Eldia and Chikusa walk past the table where the hero's party is currently sitting. A soft creeping sound echoes through the hall as Eldia's dark energy moves quietly beneath the edge of a long tablecloth. Prince William studies the situation and suggests that the masks serve as the official tickets for the secret auction. Eldia watches him and realizes that the prince is indeed the first person among the group to figure out the truth. Licht considers the logistics of the event and wonders how the workers manage to tell the different masks apart. Yuria explains that the accessories are likely marked with magic, so the staff can identify the guests easily. Licht asks if the priestess is able to perform a similar magical spell herself. Yuria confirms her ability and mentions that she successfully figured out the technique by observing the behavior of a guest earlier in the evening. Prince William proposes that the team should find a way to obtain staff uniforms. He concludes that having access to both guest and employee clothing will provide them with better cover for their investigation. Licht asks why Yuria appears to be distracted by something in the room. The priestess looks around with a focused gaze and thinks about how she could have sworn she felt the familiar presence of her lady nearby. Eldia reacts with a sudden start as she realizes that Yuria felt her presence in the room. Albert looks at his mistress and asks if she is feeling all right while they walk through the hallway. Eldia is in a state of panic as she explains her belief that the priestess might have actually noticed them. Albert wonders if the girl has finally developed the ability to sense Eldia's specific magical spells. Eldia states that she successfully dispelled her shadow magic before Yuria could be certain of what she felt, and concludes they are safe for the moment. The group continues walking as Eldia observes that the heroes have found a way into the auction by using both guest and staff disguises. She notes that they always put in a full effort and admits this was the smartest move for them to make. Eldia is sweating and asks Albert what she should do because she is unsure if she can remain calm if the heroes approach her the same way they did previously. Albert reminds Eldia that she is currently playing the role of the businesswoman Elua Howard and tells her that keeping a safe distance and acting the part will prevent them from knowing her true identity. Albert explains that she is seated in the VIP section, which makes it unlikely for her to encounter the heroes' party, while Eldia acknowledges his statement. Eldia notices that other victims of theft have managed to sneak into the masquerade and realizes that many people are willing to go to great lengths to reclaim their stolen possessions. Albert looks at Eldia and begins to speak about how the situation might feel unusual to her. Albert states that the event organizers will likely catch on to the presence of intruders soon, while Eldia observes that the situation is disturbing because it feels like the organizers wanted this infiltration to happen. Eldia realizes that something feels wrong about the crowd. She observes that very wealthy guests are mixing with victims who have lost their most valued possessions. She considers that if theft victims are permitted to join the auction, there must be others present who are prepared to pay huge sums of money to get what they want. Eldia decides that staying out of the way is the best strategy for success. She concludes that the victims are unpredictable and will only cause trouble for her plans. Eldia expresses her unease about the situation to herself. She feels that there is a hidden motive behind the event. Chikusa mentions that the girl they saw earlier was a priestess and states her curiosity about why Eldia seems so concerned about her. The samurai suggests there might be some kind of history between the two of them. Albert watches his mistress and thinks about her weakness for her favorites. He realizes that Lady Elua would lose all her composure immediately if those characters ever tried to seduce her. Albert states his belief that his lady would crumble in an instant if her favorites approached her. Eldia shouts back that it would not be that fast and claims she would last for at least 2 instants. Albert ignores the comment and maintains a steady gaze. Albert turns to Chikusa and suggests that she should consider an immediate retreat if they happen to encounter the heroes. Chikusa nods and states that she will keep that in mind. Eldia begins to sob quietly as she concludes that her companions do not trust her to stay composed. A bright light fills the room as the masked guests gather in the large rows of seats inside the auction hall. Eldia rests her hand on the balcony railing of her private box and looks down at the crowd as the event prepares to start. Eldia peeks over the balcony railing and identifies the location of the special VIP Plus seats. Albert explains his belief that Count Debris and the secret mastermind are located in that section. Eldia asks if there is a way to get inside, and Albert confirms he has already found a path. Albert suggests making his move once Eldia has successfully won the auction for Chikusa's sword. Eldia agrees to the plan to raid the opposition after the blade is secured, and Albert accepts the order. Eldia sits back and thinks about how she already obtained a copy of the auction item list. She considers her next steps once the legendary sword Hagazuki is finally back in her possession. Eldia begins to cry with joy while thinking about her true reason for staying. She wants to have a front-row view as Licht, Yuria, and Kortovia build their legendary bond together. Eldia reflects on her intent to speak with the mastermind despite only being there to provide support. She reminds herself to prepare for a quick escape as soon as the opportunity arises. Albert offers to keep a close watch on the prince, whom he calls an intruding mouse, to ensure he does not get caught, and asks if this arrangement is acceptable. Eldia understands that Albert is referring to Prince William with his choice of words. Eldia agrees that while the prince has done well at sneaking in so far, there is always a chance that he might make a mistake. Eldia begins rummaging through her belongings to find a set of tools for the task ahead. The lady presents a pair of daggers and an earring for Albert to take with him. Eldia explains that the enchanted earring will track a location and allow for communication through shadows while also serving as a portal for an emergency escape. Eldia mentions that she also provided an enchanted earring to Kortovia as Albert listens. The princess instructs her butler to make sure he uses the item if the situation becomes dangerous. Albert wonders if his lady truly believes he is foolish enough to find himself in such a difficult position. Eldia explains that she considers him to be the best of the best, but points out that even top warriors require the right tools for when a mission fails to go as planned. Albert smiles with satisfaction and confirms the lady's statement is correct. Eldia admires the butler's confident expression and concludes that he will no longer be stubborn about accepting her help. Chikusa clears her throat and observes that Eldia and Albert are truly quite a pair. Eldia successfully achieves her goal by winning the auction for the sword Hagazuki almost immediately. A staff member thanks her for the payment and leads the group toward the weapon. Chikusa fidgets with nervous energy while the employee asks if the sword on the table is the correct item. Eldia confirms the identity of the blade and addresses her guard. Chikusa reaches out and gently brushes her hand against the scabbard of the legendary katana. Chikusa smiles and offers a soft apology to the sword for the amount of time it took to recover it. Eldia grits her teeth in a moment of intensity while the casino worker bows and leaves the room. Eldia cries with joy for her guard while Chikusa wonders why her mistress is weeping. Eldia reflects on how the recovery of the weapon is important because Chikusa no longer has a hometown. Chikusa wonders if Eldia used her special vision to learn the truth about her past history. Eldia offers an apology and rummages through her clothing while noting that a sword cannot be worn properly with a suit. Eldia produces a leather sword belt and tells Chikusa to put it on while the warrior wonders how the lady stores such large items inside her skirt. Chikusa fastens the weapon to her leg and notes that the feeling is different but nice as she thanks Eldia for the help. Eldia decides that the samurai looks far too good with a sword belt over Western clothing. Eldia offers a frantic apology and promises her actions were not for her own benefit. Eldia tells herself to settle down because the moment to meet Albert and identify the mastermind is close at hand. Chikusa swears to repay all the money spent on recovering the sword Hagazuki and on her own behalf. The warrior states her commitment to fulfilling this debt even if it takes the rest of her life. Eldia tells Chikusa not to worry about the cost because she plans to take all her money back from the organizers anyway. Eldia says that having the samurais help with her plan will be sufficient payment, while Chikusa reacts with confusion to the proposal. Albert moves toward a door as Eldia explains that reclaiming the funds is a natural choice since they should never have had to pay that money in the first place. Eldia makes a note of the secret vault's location and realizes that she cannot keep money that actually belongs to her companion. A man laughs and tells the group that Eldia is acting like a very devious woman. Albert asks if his words sounded strange, and the man replies that the logic is perfectly clear to him even if it seems absurdly straightforward. Albert thinks about how much he wants to see the expression on the lady's face, and notes that he would lose control of his magic if he opened his eyes while the other staff are so far away. Albert looks at the lock design, which features a crescent moon surrounded by red roses and thorns, and concludes that the style is far too edgy. Eldia experiences a sudden realization and concludes that the current situation now explains everything. Eldia reflects on her previous confusion regarding why a criminal organization would act so strangely by deliberately inviting their own victims to the event. The princess clenches her hand as she understands that this outcome is inevitable given the involvement of a specific man. Eldia identifies the insignia on the vault as a mark of control from a demon, which serves as proof that the people here are being viewed as food. Eldia considers a powerful being who left the underworld centuries ago to hide among humans and prey on them from the shadows. She notes that people worship his strength despite his cruelty and realizes that the man sitting in the high-ranking seat must be him. The lady finds the timing of his arrival to be strange because the character does not belong in Cortovia's original plot and is instead supposed to appear in Albert's specific story. Eldia wonders if the different connection stories from her game knowledge are starting to blend together. She considers the possibility that two events are happening at once and realizes the timing is very bad. Eldia concludes this is happening because she changed Albert's storyline even though he has no current link to the hero or the priestess. She observes that the crime lord's connection story is already in progress and expresses concern about what will happen if Albert proceeds with his mission at the same time. Eldia understands that if Albert's story reaches its conclusion without the hero being there to help, it will lead to a fatal ending. Eldia determines that she must remove Albert from the location immediately as Albert calls out to her lady. Albert speaks into her enchanted earring to report a major problem. Eldia asks for an explanation of the situation and also asks if he is okay. Eldia listens to her communication device and says she is fine as Albert reports that the prince was captured. Albert mentions he provided as much cover as possible and tells the lady to get to the auction hall right away. Prince William sits chained inside a cage. Eldia reacts to the news that the prince has been caught by the enemies. An auctioneer stands at a podium and announces a surprise addition to the evening's items. He tells the crowd that the newcomer is a simple intruder who tried to sneak into their favorite auction. Eldia and Chikusa watch from the balcony as a bright light hits the stage. The auctioneer states that even though the staff does not know the captive's name, he is a fine young man with a healthy appearance. The captive is presented in heavy chains and a collar for the guests to see. The auctioneer tells the audience that this specimen is a great choice for anyone who failed to find a well-trained pet and calls the boy a beautiful beast. Chikusa walks with the princess and calls the event a disgusting display. She notes that people act this way when they have too much money and begin to believe they are better than others. Eldia observes that the buyers at this auction only want a plaything they can use however they like. The scene focuses on the cage as Eldia thinks about how people catch beautiful humans and members of rare races just to sell them off like common animals. Prince William grits his teeth as Eldia points out that a blue-blooded royal is worth much more than any average noble. Eldia worries that the prince's defiant look will backfire. She thinks his expression only makes it seem like he wants to have his pride crushed. Despite her worries, Eldia shudders with excitement and admits to herself that she is also enjoying the view. Albert explains through Shadow that he suggested the auction as a way to break the prince's will instead of disposing of him. Eldia tells Albert that his plan was a good move. Eldia wears a wide grin as Albert reflects on how he expected things to turn out her way. Eldia reflects on her own nature and admits that as a fan she is bound to have many fantasies. She concludes that she is simply driven by pure desire. Eldia focuses on a bid of 10 billion. She realizes that one of her fantasies about winning a favorite character in an auction is finally coming true. She tells herself that she is doing it for a good cause. The auctioneer begins the bidding at 5 million. Prices quickly rise to 6 and 7 million. Eldia admits to herself that this exciting situation is exactly what she wants. Eldia speaks into her communication device and tells Albert to leave the situation to her. She informs him that the plan has changed and orders him to leave the area immediately. Albert tries to ask for an explanation. Eldia stares ahead with a focused gaze and tells Albert he must follow her command no matter what happens. Albert realizes that one of her favorite characters must be involved in the auction. Eldia notes that he is very skilled at managing these situations. Eldia says she will meet Albert at the agreed-upon location. Then Eldia calls out to Cortovia through her earring to check her status. Eldia tells Cortovia over their radio that she is about to take care of Prince William and instructs the group to be ready to burst into the room. Cortovia tries to ask a question as the signal cuts off. Eldia tells Chikusa that it is time to move and the samurai responds with a silent nod. The pair prepares to enter the main hall of the auction. Eldia walks forward and thinks about how it is time to act like a villain so that her favorite characters can finally have a chance to show their true power. The auctioneer calls out a price of 100 million and starts the final count for the sale. Eldia interrupts the process by shouting out a new bid of 1 billion. Silence falls over the crowd as the auctioneer stammers in shock. He looks toward the source of the voice and asks for confirmation that the bidder really intends to pay such a high price. Eldia steps into the spotlight and asks if the amount she offered is too small. She wonders if the auctioneer believes she is unable to afford the purchase. The auctioneer shakes his head and says he does not doubt her. Eldia asks him if he thinks her offer is just a joke as she walks toward the stage with Chikusa. Eldia decides she must prove herself. She thinks that she should take this chance to do everything at once while Chikusa presents a large suitcase. Eldia throws the suitcase open and sends a huge cloud of paper money flying into the air. Prince William stares in shock as the cash falls all over the room and his cage. Eldia tells the crowd she will start the payment with the 100 million she has in the case. William watches the money fall as Eldia maintains her smile. Eldia looks back at the auctioneer and asks if she may write a check to cover the remaining balance of the bid. The auctioneer shakes with fear and tells her that her plan is perfectly fine. The auctioneer announces the bid of 1 billion and starts the countdown while Eldia feels a wave of satisfaction and reflects on how she always wanted to throw a shower of bills. The rest of the audience remains silent, so the auctioneer hits his gavel and announces that the sale is final. Eldia looks at Prince William and notes the collar around his neck while thinking to herself that the situation is quite bold and exciting. Prince William clenches his hands and gives Eldia an angry look as she stands before him. Eldia worries that the prince's fierce gaze will only encourage the people in the room who enjoy seeing others in trouble. She tells herself that she is not one of those people but admits she enjoys seeing a favorite character in shackles. Eldia takes a moment to think and concludes that even for her the current situation might be a bit excessive. Prince William stares at her in shock. The prince grits his teeth and declares that he will never give in or break his spirit. Eldia wears a wide grin as she observes that the young man is completely serious about not backing down. The princess decides that she cannot let the interaction end as it is and reaches for the boy. Eldia roughly yanks on the heavy chain of the prince's collar and pulls him toward her with a sudden force. Leaning in close to his face, Eldia tells him she is eager to find out exactly how much longer he can maintain his pride. Eldia feels bad for her behavior and offers a silent apology to the prince. She tells herself that she cannot afford to be kind to him right now because any sign of weakness might reveal the truth to the other guests. As she holds the chain, Eldia confirms her suspicion that the heavy collar is enchanted. She realizes the device is specifically designed to keep the young man from using his magical abilities. Eldia understands that the magic-dampening collar is the only reason the prince has not already made an escape. She decides that she must keep him under control to prevent him from causing a scene before her plan is ready. While pretending to yank on his chain for the crowd, Eldia leans down and whispers a quiet message to the boy. She tells him to simply stay where he is and wait for his friends to come and rescue him. Prince William stares up at the lady with a look of surprise. Eldia turns her focus toward her hidden allies and gives the signal for her companions to make their move. A group of men in suits kicks open the large doors and announces the arrival of the Ordi family. They state that order will now be restored to the room. Cortovia leaps from the high balcony and lands firmly on the floor below while clutching her staff. Cortovia tells the organizers they have a lot of nerve to pull a stunt like this on her family's territory. She continues by saying they have a lot to answer for because of the harm they caused to her family members. Cortovia swings her weapon and unleashes a powerful magical blast that shatters the surrounding area. Cortovia looks down at Count Debris and tells him he can pay back his debt with his own blood. Eldia watches with excitement and realizes this is the famous line she has been waiting to hear. Eldia cries with happiness while she watches the scene. She thinks to herself that she would fall to her knees to worship the moment if she could get away with it. She tells herself that this was exactly what she wanted to see and believes everything was worth it. Nearby, the members of the Ordi family continue their work. They pin down the remaining guards as the narrator notes that Eldia cannot stop her plan yet. Eldia asks Chikusa to break the shackles and reminds her to be careful when cutting the collar. William looks on in shock while Chikusa states her understanding and asks the lady to hold the heavy chain out of the way. Chikusa reaches for her weapon and grips the hilt of her sword. The samurai draws her blade in a single blur of motion and strikes the enchanted metal. The broken chains fall to the ground while Eldia turns to walk away. She tells the young man to hurry back to the rest of his party. William rubs his neck and asks why the woman chose to save him. Eldia stops and thinks about why he would even ask such a question. She reflects on how she has always played the role of a villain around the young man. She decides that since she is wearing a disguise, she can finally be honest about her feelings for once. Eldia tells him that she loves them all so much that she would do anything for them. William is left in a state of total shock by her sudden confession. He watches as Eldia and her guard walk away into the shadows. He whispers her name and wonders how she is able to say such kind things to him. Eldia stands in the vault room and tells Chikusa they have the money and it is time to leave. She instructs her guard to hold onto her tightly. Eldia explains that she will use her shadow magic to transport them both. Dark energy begins to swirl around their feet. The black shadows grow larger and pull both Eldia and Chikusa into the floor as they vanish from the room. The scene shifts to the quiet streets of the town under the night sky. A pool of liquid shadows appears on the cobblestone ground as both Eldia and Chikusa rise out of it. Albert waits in the alleyway and tells his mistress he is happy she returned without any harm. Albert looks at his mistress and calls her by her name. The butler leans forward and states that he finished all his tasks without any delay. Eldia watches him and realizes how beautiful he looks at this moment. She thinks his dedication is moving and feels her own heart beat faster. She tells him he did a good job and suggests that they should leave together. Albert reaches out to touch Eldia. He offers an apology and explains that he used too much energy while dealing with the people who were chasing him. Albert asks if he can receive a small amount of her blood to recover from his exhaustion. Eldia is completely shocked by how bold her butler is acting. She observes that he seems very sure she will agree to his request. She is overwhelmed by his sudden confidence and realizes she is seeing a new side of him. Albert slides his gloved hand around the princess's waist. Eldia notes the bold move and labels him a real player. Eldia realizes this direct interaction is not what she usually seeks out. She expresses a preference for staying in the background and watching events unfold from a distance. The princess starts laughing. She decides the situation is too perfect and feels herself getting fired up by how new and interesting the experience has become. Albert takes Eldia's hand and brings it close to him with a serious expression. Eldia feels like her heart is about to stop beating from the intense excitement. A dark pool of shadow magic suddenly begins to swirl beneath the hem of her gown. The shadows lash out and pull the butler away from his mistress. Albert is left suspended in the air with a look of total confusion while Eldia watches from behind. Eldia stares down at an unseen intruder with a cold expression. She makes it clear that the person standing before her is definitely not the one she was expecting.